I'd like to call the meeting to order, and please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, at this time, we have some guests tonight before we get to our business portion of the meeting, and want to make a recognition. And Trace, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Tonight, we are honored to recognize our law enforcement departments that serve our school community. Today is National Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. It recognizes the critical service and sacrifice law enforcement men and women provide our Hudson School District each and every day. Tonight it's my honor to invite St. Croix County Sheriff Knutson, Hudson PD Chief Willems, and North Hudson Village PD Chief Richard up to the stage.
All right. I guess at this time I want to express our thanks, and we would, before we do our photo opportunity, turn it over to other board members for any comments that they would like to make. So,
Mr. President?
Try to be even on the sides. Go ahead, Molly.
Thank you. I always want to go first. I was so happy to see you here tonight, Mark, because I haven't seen your face for a while. It's our kids, we're in school together, but I'm more familiar with you. But one of the things I know about you and your family is your commitment to community. It's not just driving the car around and showing up when times are tough, but you're really there for all of us in the community from birth to the end. And we really appreciate the friend you are, all of you are to the community. Thank you so much for all that you do every day.
Kate?
Sorry. Thank you so much for being here tonight and for allowing us to honor you. I know that each and every one of us have had to use your services at one point or another, and we're so grateful that we can make one call and you're there to help us. So we'll forever support you. Also for what you've done for the Hudson School District and provided so much support to our kids that are here in the school. I think a lot of times we look at police and we see the end result of maybe somebody getting in behind the back seat of a police car. But what we actually see here at the school is that you're in the schools working with kids and supporting them each and every day. So thank you so much.
Mr. President.
Yes, Rob?
There's so much that you all do that we simply take for granted. It's obviously you're supported by wonderful teams, but the fabric of our community would be so much different had you and your teams, if you were not doing what you do. So thank you for the stability. Thank you for the, frankly, the communities that we just take for granted. A lot of it has to do with what you all do. So thank you very much.
All right. Bob?
Yes, congratulations, and obviously what you guys do in the schools is seen every day, more so even for the community. Can't say enough good things about how you are perceived in our community and respected. I won't disagree with a statement that I might have moved from North Hudson to Hudson because of that speeding ticket on the Malibu Bridge, Mr. Rickert. But well deserved. Exactly. So thank you very much.
Right. Heather?
One of the things I really appreciate about the policing in this community is that, yes, you guys are there for intervention and response, and you equally are there doing that upstream work that builds relationships with kids. And I don't know about Hudson, but I know in North Hudson on Halloween, the fact that you guys are driving around handing out the light up necklaces, that some of the kids' earliest interactions with police officers are with you guys being their friends and bringing joy to their lives. And I think, I can't prove this with data, but my guess is, and I'm sure there's research somewhere that shows, it's that community policing, that early work that you do, building relationships with kids, that leads to one of the things we love about this community is that yes, we have kids who run into trouble, but it's not happening a lot. And I think you guys get a lot of the credit for that. So thank you for that upstream work. Really appreciate it.
All right. And Carrie?
Well, I'd also like to echo everyone's thanks, not just today, but every day, and how invaluable you are in our community. But something I think that we at least get to see is your collaboration with administration and how closely you work on school safety. So thank you very much.
Yes, and I just want to say again, sincere gratitude for your work and the work of all the people that you oversee in keeping our students and staff safe and secure. I won't go into the personal stories of how I've utilized each of your departments, but yeah, that it's something that we take for granted, I think, sometimes, and we very much appreciate this opportunity to express that. So at this time, I just ask the board members to get up, and we'll come around and get a picture taken with our law enforcement chiefs. Okay.
It's more of a dialogue and stuff.
Okay. All right. Just you one.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So next up, I'd like to invite our state representative, Shannon Zimmerman, recently reelected, and why don't you tell us how the year has started in the legislature and what the plans are as they relate to education. Hopefully, we can have a little bit of a dialogue because this is something opportunity. I think you got to push the button and it's got to be up.
Thank you. I always appreciate the invitation. I think the last time we got together formally, it was a lot warmer outside. I believe it was August-ish, somewhere in that window. Again, I appreciate the welcome. As my conversation this morning with Nicolette went, no formal presentation. I actually welcome more of an interactive dialogue, and I'll answer any questions I can at this early stage in the session. But before I begin, I want to just comment on the law enforcement officers who were just up here. Last week I was in Madison, and we're taking up some legislation that is directly tied to law enforcement. I made calls to each of the Pierce County and St. Croix County law enforcement representatives. I didn't make it to St. Croix County before I had phone calls back from each one of those guys. And so it's just a testament to the great job that they do and how active and involved they are in protecting and helping our community. So.
All right. And with that, do we have any questions of Shannon? Go ahead.
So first off, thank you for everything you've been doing, and congratulations on your reelection. Certainly as it relates to school funding, school finance, it's something that is terribly important to us. Mm-hmm. We have heard about the governor's proposals. Do you have a sense of where that's at, especially with some of the changes that may come about?
Yeah. So just as a quick reminder, and I don't think I necessarily have to remind this group because you were so connected to it, but the biggest question right now that we are hearing relates to the funding approach for the upcoming budget cycle. Last budget cycle, the legislature decided to utilize and leverage the substantial amount of federal funds that were directed to the state. Now, there have been those who certainly debate that. In my opinion, it would have been negligent to ignore that. But what it did do, and I acknowledge this, is it does create what you would call a gap in this upcoming session. As a member of the Joint Committee on Finance, I haven't been shy about this fact that that issue is real. That issue does need to be addressed and backfilled as we go into the upcoming session. Now, I know in numerous conversations with our good superintendent, the funding formula as it's applied across the state affects communities differently based on a lot of different factors. It's maybe an imperfect formula, but it's the one we have. And so I know in my conversations with Nick that we're working on some ideas that hopefully result in improvements for Hudson as well. But right now I would preliminarily, and literally it's that, we've had 1 week down there, I would say preliminarily that most of my colleagues at this point recognize that that condition of the last budget cycle is something that needs to be addressed as we go into the upcoming budget cycle again as well.
I guess to follow up on that, you talked about funding mechanisms, and specifically, well, this last year I got asked to be on the Policy and Resolution Committee for the State Association of School Boards, and so involved, some meetings down in Madison and driving over to Stevens Point, hearing what other people have in other parts of the state. And they're definitely reporting this fiscal cliff, if you will, where they were able to get by with some of this federal money, but that federal money is not going to be there the next time. So anytime you get this one-time money, it doesn't help in the long term, and especially in districts where there might be decline in enrollment. So there was support, in fact, a resolution for this, the penny sales tax, similar to the situation in Iowa that Dr. Ouellette's talked about before. Hudson actually, our school board made the resolution, and when Rob was the delegate, we got that passed by the whole assembly of the board, so now it's official part of their policy. And with you being on joint finance, do you see some approaches? I've heard other things about the sales tax, or about the income tax rather, but perhaps getting flattened out a little bit. So do you see a good potential for this reform coming through that's supported by school boards across the country, or across the state? And I'm specifically talking about the penny tax.
Yeah, so for everybody's benefit, what we're referring to here is the Iowa Save program, and Dr. Ouellette, thank you again. I know we've had numerous conversations about that model, supported on a bipartisan basis in the state of Iowa, and essentially what it does is it utilizes a penny tax, sales tax to be specific, and those proceeds are directed in two different ways primarily. One, an appropriation of those funds goes towards school infrastructure expenses. Buildings is what we're talking about, and the result of that is you see an immediate decline in referendums, which I think is coming up later on your agenda here today. Number two, the remaining funds then also go into property tax relief for those within that specific district. You're right, there's been a lot of talk of late about various tax strategies. Wisconsin, and this shouldn't shock anybody here if you've been in business or managed a checkbook and finances over time, that surge of federal funds has resulted in a surplus. We have a substantial surplus in Wisconsin. I've long believed that's not, the state's money to keep and use forever. That's the taxpayers' money, and ultimately should find its way back in a variety of forms. There has been additional requests kind of in that same model from some of the municipalities related to shared revenues and how our communities support the infrastructure and some of those sort of things that they do, wanting to utilize this sort of approach. If we look at sales tax in this particular region of the state, there's an argument that is advantageous to us here in Hudson, Wisconsin, because, I happened to go down 2 weeks ago downtown Hudson to watch the Green Bay Packer football game, and there was mostly Minnesota people there spending their money here, and that was sales tax that, would be collected if that model existed. I do believe that we will absolutely see some level of reform. There's a lot of interested parties here. I'm going to certainly advocate for the things that I think are not only going to help this rising star that we are in the West. And what I mean by that, and I say it all the time, Madison and Milwaukee are very established. We are the next rocket ship in the state of Wisconsin, and we need to make sure that we are out in front of that so that we have the appropriate resources, workforce to support the needs of our employers, educational assets and resources as well. You're going to see tax change this cycle, I'm certain of it. The question simply becomes now, how exactly does that get baked during this process?
Yeah. I mean, we've heard a lot of things about, when it was instituted and then renewed by the Iowa legislature and governor, that it's been a bipartisan approach, whether it was Democrats or Republicans. It's something that got passed by almost a unanimous vote to extend it. So it can be popular for both parties, plus taking that pressure off of the property tax, which is something I hear a lot from our seniors and people who aren't fixed incomes and want to remain in their homes as long as they can. If we had that avenue, we wouldn't have to go to the voters to be able to make and address those capital needs. So we appreciate any work you can do in that regard. Is there other comments or questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Do you want to go? Okay. So, local control is certainly important to any school district. Mm-hmm. The ability of a community to make our voters to make their own choices is also very important. Currently, school districts have the ability to go to referendum once in odd years, mm-hmm. and then twice in even years. And as we've seen over the last handful of years, the need of school districts has grown, and the willingness of those local communities to support has also grown. I mean, I love the idea of the 1 cent sales tax to reduce referenda, the need for referenda, but currently school districts are strapped. Mm-hmm. Is there, I guess my question for you is there anything we can do to help you change that even a little bit so locally we can do more in the way of referenda?
Yeah, so first part of your question, and just to comment on it, I am always a fan of local control, local influence, because you're closest to the things that matter to Hudson, and having someone in Madison make decisions maybe that affect you specifically or uniquely, I think is always a bit of a challenge. I'm going to go back to something that Jamie said a moment ago and tie it to this. This is always a delicate subject because Hudson and the greater Hudson community, Western Wisconsin, I think we all would agree is a fairly affluent part of the state. We're blessed in so many different ways with the things that we have. And while for some, if the tax was increased, it may not be such an issue. But going back to what Jamie had said, we also have a number of those on fixed incomes, those who are at retirement age, and a tax increase could be very detrimental to them. On my drive home last week, I fielded a number of calls from people who received their tax bill recently, and they have concerns over their ability, to stay, to keep pace with some of these sort of things. So when you look holistically across the state of Wisconsin, to answer your question, this is just my opinion on this, so here goes. I think that there are many districts in the state of Wisconsin where student population is declining. And it is probably time for them to seriously give consideration to consolidation. Because at some point, when you add up all of the possible schools, and I'm not saying that for Hudson, because again, we're in a high growth area within the state, I think that it's something that schools have to consider. Because if you don't consider it, then the taxpayers of Wisconsin have to maintain support for all of these schools in each of these potentially rural districts. And so that if that is addressed properly, it will have a profound effect on the whole state and how we fund some of these sort of things and what our resources are capable of doing in that regard. So, hopefully it gives you a sense of kind of what I'm seeing and how I view it and what I think ultimately may help us out here long term.
Molly, did you have a question?
I did, thank you. My concern, I guess, is going to our property tax base and our declining enrollment is partly due to the level of the cost of housing in our area. I'm wondering, I know that the city is putting in like a 40-unit, I don't know what the city is, but they've approved a 40-unit building that will have some income limits, will be for families. How can the state support municipalities, or how can municipalities work with the state to get workforce housing, which would in turn help school districts with employees, kids in school, and our tax base? Thank you.
Good question, and actually it's reminiscent of this similar question, or almost same question that we talked about in August, right? Because the problem hasn't gone away. So first of all, the state of Wisconsin does provide currently various types of incentive grants and so forth to builders and developers trying to address this issue. The challenge you have is go build a 40-unit complex in Hudson, and the affordability of that won't last long, right? Because demand is so great that it just drives up prices, and then we have to tell a developer, no, don't make that much. There's a lot of factors, in my opinion, that are weighing in on this. One, for example, and this is addressed more at the local level, but that has to do with, zoning and lot sizes and those sort of things, right? Those are very real issues. I'm not, here to speak one way or the other, but when you have 3, 4, 5 acre lots in the town of Hudson, for example, those are not going to be trivial in terms of expense. And you're right. The profile of the type of individuals who are now buying homes, I think at last stat I saw, I want to say Hudson is hovering in the $500,000 median home price range now. That's real money. And so the people who can afford that, you're right, they probably aren't moving here with 3 kids in elementary or the middle school. And so that condition is so much bigger than us, because this is just a high growth area. During this last election cycle, I can't tell you how many Minnesotans I met who are now new to Wisconsin. They're coming over here. They like the state, the policies. They like the things happening in our great community. So that is only exacerbating this issue. But ultimately, I think there's no one solution. I think the combination of continued grants to try and drive that, I think that also recognition that at the local level, and people have to get involved and speak up, because we can't solve everything from Madison, nor do you want us to, that we need to take a good hard look at the spacing and the zoning issues that surround our community, because there could be opportunity there to create some housing which allows for more of the, I know workforce housing is now, it's in and it's out on a weekly basis these days, but I get what you're after. It's affordable housing for people, and that's one lever that can be pulled locally that could help address that.
Okay, go ahead, Heather.
Nice to see you.
Hey, likewise.
Just to piggyback on that, I had a chance last week to talk with someone who served for 8 years as Commissioner of Housing in Minnesota, and she used the term essential worker housing. She said after COVID, people know who essential workers are, that they're your teachers, they're your police officers, they're your CNAs in your nursing homes, because I think it's that whole, we have a really low poverty level in Hudson. Well, that poverty level is so low. And yet our median household income is $85,500. And so I know a lot of the conversations I've heard lately are talking about it's hard for families making less than $100,000 a year to afford a house in Hudson. And median means that half of our families are below $85,000, would have a hard time right now buying a house in Hudson. So I do think we have to look at these collaborations, and there are things happening not far away from us where districts and cities and developers and government funders and philanthropy are collaborating. And so, we're going to need to do that. And I think maybe a silver lining of this recent conversation, continued conversation we're all having about how do we keep our community schools, hinges on how do we make sure that we continue to be a community that people with children can afford to buy houses in? Because the only other option is to raise taxes significantly, and I don't know that that's a very attractive option for this community either. Not impossible, but, so I appreciate you being willing to be a resource and help bring people to the table, because no one part of that collaborative force is going to make this happen in a community like Hudson.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You used an operative word there, Heather, if I can just point to it, collaboration. I think that is key. I want to say it's 2 or 3 weeks from now, I'll be at the University of Wisconsin Stout in a forum specifically talking about housing and workforce housing or affordable housing and how these communities come together. But it's going to take everybody. There's just simply no question about it. We can't go to one of these vested parties and say, you solve it for us, because you're spot on. It has to be the state for sure, and what we do there, the local communities, the schools, the employers within the area. I mean, you know, there's a lot of cool things happening with some of the St. Croix Valley employers as well in terms of how they are resourceful and thinking about ways, excuse me, to address this issue. So it's a strategy and that needs to be employed here, thoughtfully developed and then employed, but there's no, you know, one solution for all. But collaboration, to me, absolutely, that's the answer.
Any other comments, Carrie?
I don't have a specific question for you. Congratulations, by the way, on re-election.
Thank
But
you.
I am very appreciative that you're wanting to look at the school funding model and hopefully kind of get that realigned so
Yeah.
that it is more equitable.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You know, I've never been shy, and I do this job, and sometimes I probably am too transparent, but here's the way I really look at this. I have been fortunate in this part of the state to start a couple different businesses, and we've had some great success, and we have fantastic people in this area. But we're growing, and I know employers are struggling fiercely. There's housing, there's all these different sort of things. But I think it's the expectation of all of you and of all of the St. Croix Valley residents that we need to be looking beyond the immediate issues and looking out 3, 5, 7, 10 years, because we are going to grow, and what decisions strategically can we make now so that we're addressing our workforce needs? You know, I have visited Hudson School District every single year, and they do a great job, and we do the tours and meet a bunch of teachers and students and go through your programs, and they're working, and I'm watching you adapt to an employment market, to employers' needs locally. That is important. Many children in your schools are going to go on to college, but you're also going to have some kids that are going to enter the workforce, and you're going above and beyond, I know, in some of the technical things that you're teaching at this school to ready them for family supportive jobs. I know, Nick, I beat this one to death, but I'll do it one more time. You know, the kids leaving here with welding certificates that are going to go out and start at $27 an hour, and with 9 months more training, they're at $37. That's pretty good. And so I think it's that recognition that if we don't fill the jobs in our communities, employers are resourceful. I saw it my whole career. They will have to adapt and move potentially. We don't want that. We need all of these parts collaborating together so that we're successful both now and also 10, 15, and 20 years from now.
I guess one other subject that would help out our district and isn't necessarily a partisan issue, and that is, special education and, funding that. I know there's talk about getting it up to 60% level and so forth. I would really stress that could help everyone and shouldn't necessarily be a partisan issue. So I was wondering where you come down on leading that, and just seems to be a good opportunity with this big surplus for us to begin to get back on a parity track for special education funding.
Yep. Well, for anybody, all the thousands of people watching on, I'm sure, television tonight, they may want a little more information. So essentially, the per pupil funding model in the state of Wisconsin appropriates a certain amount of money for schools to use. Special education and other categoricals are applied for just that, special and unique categories. If they're not funded sufficiently, the school districts, you, have no choice but to just take it from your general fund. Last budget cycle, I was certainly pleased that we addressed the issue in an improved way. By increasing the special education funding. These are students who, we want them to be successful. We need them to be successful in our communities and go on to take the great jobs in our backyard. So to answer your question, yeah, I think when we look at the overall funding model, if I was king for a day, we would modernize it in Wisconsin, and I don't leave that off the table. The winds may shift just right where we could do that. And what I mean by that is that it may be that we can more effectively fund the unique needs of Hudson, both from a per pupil's perspective, but also in the categoricals as well. There's other districts in the state of Wisconsin, very bluntly, that receive a lot of money, and there's a lot of questions around it. I'm not, here to point fingers and name names, but we've got to look at this formula as a whole and identify ways we can improve it, make it better for both the student, the school, the faculty, but also the taxpayers. I never want to leave them out of this equation because it's their money at the end of the day. They have a vested interest, certainly, in the quality of your output, of your product, but they're at the table as well. So I think there is a balance to be had there, but we saw an increase last cycle. I'm not Nostradamus, but I would probably preliminarily expect some level of increase in the upcoming cycle for special education as well.
And again, that's something that hopefully the legislature can work on, and it wouldn't be hard to get, work collaboratively with the governor on that. One that might be a more contentious issue would be the voucher program, and how do you see that coming out? Because there's been talk about expanding the program and beyond Racine and Milwaukee and so forth. And again, I'm for people being able to have a choice of where they send their kids. It's just that as a public school advocate and a board member, we don't want to see our funding hurt because somebody else chooses to send their kids to private school. And we start getting into that public funding of private schools. It's hard to fill all buckets, if you will.
So I too am I'm a product of public education. I'm a supporter of public education, but I'm also really pro-parent. And I recognize that parents also have a strong voice and have a say here, right? And so I don't want to dismiss that. So I believe that both groups can be accommodated in this equation. So you're right. There's been a lot of talk about greater flexibility in terms of the voucher program. I know the governor has come out and said, a non-starter for the governor is universal vouchers. I'm not surprised, and nor do I think that that's necessarily where the legislature will go. But I do think in that modernized version, I think that we can still honor the independence and recognize the power and the support of the parent with their own children, giving them some flexibility without, being a detriment to the public schools. The bigger issue, and this is a conversation that the superintendent and I have had many times, the rules that apply to some of those schools are not necessarily the same rules that you have to align to. And so I would say if we're going to entertain the idea of providing an increase in voucher programs, and by the way, in the Southeast, they've been incredibly effective, hugely effective in terms of seeing a student population that is in need start to produce results that are fantastic. But I think also that has to come with some level of parity in terms of the rules you operate under, because in certain situations and in certain examples, there would be a substantial disadvantage to how you'd have to handle certain students within your school. So I'm pro-parent, I'm going to always be, but I'm also pro-educate or pro-public schools, and I absolutely believe it's not one or the other. They both can coexist and work effectively for our kids.
Mr. President?
Yes.
I would piggyback on that with those great results in Kenosha and Racine and Milwaukee, people are aware that it's districts like ours that are paying for it. And so when we talk about transparency, it is fair for us to know where our tax dollars are going for education, where in the state, how much, and what percentage. And that goes along with our funding challenges. So, and that's not both political sides want that. So with our challenges here in Hudson, if we don't have a funding help that makes sense for our community to take advantage of a sales tax or something like that, do you see the pressure mounting with that? Because our schools around here are not failing like they are in the south of the states. So and can you address that at all? And that's not a challenge or anything. It's just with the
Not
transparent.
taken as a challenge, Bob, for sure. You're right. And this example that you're describing applies to a couple other areas, right? We also have could have a similar discussion around shared revenues, right? Does St. Croix County receive in return its share of the revenues it contributes to the state? Short answer is probably no. Now, there's nuances to that. But you're right. In this particular part of the state, you got some fantastic teachers, and they're doing a good job. And when we try and address this with a statewide funding model, which is why I believe it needs to be modernized and be altered, this is what we end up with, right? And this is not necessarily advantageous. But you look at the most recent proficiency test coming out of Milwaukee Public Schools, you'd fall off your chair. And something needs to be done there, right? I mean, they need an improvement there, because if we don't help these kids, and when I say help them, we have to give them the pathway to help themselves as well. We all are personally accountable here in our journeys. But you're right. I think that we can't necessarily harm those schools across the state that are performing well, delivering for our kids, just because we have some schools, large schools, that may not be. Which is why the only way to solve that is we've got to alter this per pupil funding model in a different way so that we can accommodate for these things. Here again, it's, in my opinion, it's not going to be one or the other. Both of these things can coexist. I mean, we solve some serious problems in business, in our families, in our personal lives, in our communities. This is something that should be solved. But is pressure building? Yes, it is. I'm just entering my 4th term in office. This subject is the pressure cooker has been building each cycle. Your superintendent calls me a little more frequently than he did before, and so yeah, it's definitely starting to build.
Representative Zimmerman, and you and I have talked about vouchers, and is there an opportunity potentially where vouchers could be treated more like open enrollment, where the children that are located, wherever they're located, is who finances the voucher? And it's a combination of property tax and state aid, because there's a certain mix there. But if that could be the case, then it does become a little bit more fair, at least for districts up here, where, in Hudson, where we have over $1 million of revenue going to the voucher program, yet we don't have kids in Hudson utilizing vouchers.
Yeah.
And so, but if it could be that, fine, if there's going to be vouchers in Dane County or in Madison or Milwaukee, then the folks in Madison and Milwaukee, can shoulder that burden instead of the folks in Hudson or North Hudson paying the bill on those. I think that would go a long ways to at least some level of equity on the financial side of things, and make them not such a burden on the state. Because right now, from what I understand, what the state is doing is whenever they fund vouchers, they fund it 100% from the state. There's no local property tax, other than that money gets taken off of everybody's state funding, and then all the districts across the state are expected to backfill that with property tax, versus, those kids are assigned to their own home district, they pay the bill. I think that would help lessen the blow. Now, it probably is not going to be well received in certain areas that have a lot of kids that are vouchered, but at least for our area, that way, if parents have choice here, this community's paying for that choice versus paying for somebody else's. But yeah, definitely appreciate it.
Likewise.
Right.
Just one quick addition.
Okay.
And I know this is something that you are supportive of because we've spoken before, and I think the larger conversation, although we're here as a pre-K-12 school board, is that schools get kids at age 4 or 5. And so what can we be doing, yes, here in Hudson, but also looking to communities like Milwaukee, like Madison, what can we be doing as a collective community to be doing some of that? We talked about upstream work with our police department, some of that work investing early so that you've got kids who are walking through the door already knowing how to write their name and the alphabet, and, whereas, we've got what's you've used the term, our input. In this district, we have kids in general who are pretty well ready to learn when they hit our doors, and that's a blessing for us. There are other districts that have a lot more challenges when kids first hit their doors, and so, obviously your work as a state legislator, yes, public schools are important, and it's that other conversation, so thank you for being someone who is connecting the dots and advocating for that whole circle, as in addition to our public schools. Yeah.
Appreciated.
All right. And Kate, do you have something to ask?
I just have one more. Congratulations on your reelection. This is a little broader, but we know that schools are the heart of the community. What are your priorities for the community as you move forward?
So, this intrinsic tie between the kids who walk through your doors every single day and mom and dad who are working in our community, who are both employees and employers, this this whole situation is something that is of a top priority to me, because if we don't get out in front on what I believe to be an opportunity here, I think that Wisconsin right now, by comparison in terms of, I'll say, taxpayer friendliness, we need to improve ourselves there, because humans are very predictable. When it's in their best interest, they generally gravitate towards it. In doing so, if we can become a destination, now, we're maybe not going to be recruiting people from Florida, recruit, obvious reasons when you step outside today, but we can recruit from the upper Midwest. When we recruit, more parents' kids are coming to our communities, filling our jobs, starting their businesses, and all of these things get better. So I kind of look at them all, and I tell people this as a member of the Joint Committee of Finance. So many times you have someone walk in your office and they have a single issue, and it's really an important issue for them, right? And I don't dismiss it, but it's like our home budgets. You can't just look at transportation costs and ignore everything else. You have to look at the sum and the whole if you're going to pull this thing off and pull it off effectively. So, in this area, we're a high growth area. We need to have a more tax-friendly climate. We need to make sure our educational centers are directly connected. I can't say that enough. When I meet the chancellor at River Falls, when I talk to those in the technical colleges, and they say, what can we do and how should we do better? Connect with your local businesses. And you're doing it. I know, because I've toured your school. Keep it up, because those are the employers. Let's catch these kids before they jump across a river or before they go somewhere else, and they can build a family and raise a family here, because we've made that the right choice for them.
Excellent. Well, is there any other comments, questions? All right, seeing none, I want to thank you, Representative Zimmerman, for stopping by again and being available and open to hearing ideas, but also letting us know what's going on down in Madison. We appreciate that, so
Perfect.
Thank you.
And I want to invite all of you, if you're ever down south and you want to stop in, it's important to do that. I also want to make sure I acknowledge a number of the board members and Dr. Ouellette. We're talking on a regular basis, and that's important to me. It's helpful to me, and it allows me to represent you more effectively there and advocate on your behalf. So thank you for your willingness to participate in this process as well. It does make a difference.
Turn it over to Nick, talking about the makeup of inclement weather days.
Yes, so this is an item on the agenda. So typically in a school year, we've kind of built in kind of 2 days that we don't usually make up when we have inclement weather days. As you know, January 4th, last Wednesday, actually is our third day that we've now had snow days, and it's only early January. So that's a real concern, a real challenge for us. So as we look at starting to make these days up and also not continuing school into July, what we've tried to do is come up with what our plan would be to make these up, which is February 24th, which is currently a non-school day, would now become a school day, and school would be in session on February 24th. That would make up the January 4th day. And so the 2 days in December, we would not make those 2 days up, but January 4th we would make up. Then our next non-school day, although we do have professional development that day, is April 7th. So if we were to have another snow day between now and April 7th, we would then make that a regular school day, and we would make adjustments to our professional development calendar as we move forward. And then the last day, at least right now, that's easily on the calendar is June 9th. So if we were to have essentially 2 more snow days between now and the end of the school year, June 9th is a Friday. We would try to stay from moving into that next week, which then gets us kind of to letter D on here, which is if we had more days than that, then at that point we would start looking at adding time to the end of days to make up time. And I think the important thing is that people have to understand is, yes, there are minimum hour requirements, but in Hudson we've never been minimalist as we've tried to do this. And so we do want to make up time with kids. We think it's important. We value the instructional time. Some people have asked the question about why can't we do virtual learning days when it's a snow day and then you don't have to make up the day. Well, when we did the virtual learning days back when we were doing COVID and hybrid and all those other pieces, we had a pretty extensive program to ensure that all kids had internet connectivity and all kids had devices. We no longer, in order to do that, we were paying for mobile hotspots across the district. And we are no longer utilizing those or paying for those anymore. So we cannot guarantee that all kids would have access, nor do we have a one-to-one device ratio for all kids across the district, 4K through 12. Now, some people will say, well, other districts are doing it. Why isn't Hudson? There are other districts that may have those things available, and there are other districts that may say they may not be meeting that to 100%, but still doing that. And our feeling has been, if we can't ensure that all kids have that access, then we wouldn't do that. And so, so that is kind of some of the questions that have come up. But so as of right now, I think the big announcement or the big change is that we would be in school on February 24th to make up for last week's snow day. If we get to a point where we're starting to add time onto the end of days, we will also have to start to look at, we'll have to eliminate the high school early out on Wednesdays, because even though seniors get out earlier, there's this misconception out there that seniors don't have to meet the hour requirement. They still have to meet the hour requirement. So if we start getting past, 2 or 3 days being made up, we would have to probably eliminate that hour requirement, because the high school would be the most tight on hours, because they have, essentially over the course of the year, that's, 36 hours they don't go that everybody else goes because of the early release. So as of right now, we're not looking at eliminating that, but that would be something that, if in the next 5 to 7 weeks we have quite a few more snow days, we would look at eliminating that as well. And again, knock on wood, and hope we don't have them, but as you remember, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago or 4 years ago, we had those 4 days when it dropped basically below 40 for like 4 or 5 days, and we ended up with 9 or 10 inclement weather days. We're definitely not out of the woods yet, so it's good to have some type of plan in place. Any questions about that from the board?
Sounds like a good plan. All right. Okay. Then next up, we have kindergarten 4K registration. That's Dave's.
Yep.
Thank you very much. So excited to host our annual 4K in kindergarten registration. It is February 13th from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. at Hudson Prairie. This is an opportunity that used to, before we had 4K, it was just a kindergarten open registration process. But obviously 4K now takes precedence because most of our 4K students continue into kindergarten, but we have personnel there that are able to answer questions. It's a good opportunity to get some technology help. They're actually revamping the process right now. I think it'll be a very family-friendly process with a lot of information. We're also very excited that our 4K community partners are present to share a little bit about the programs that they offer so parents can make informed decisions.
All right, very good. And just to clarify, which facilities that within our school district would house 4K students if they're not with one of our private partners?
North Hudson, Willow River, and EP Rock.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Any questions for Dave with the rollout registration? Hearing none, then we have the February 21st school board primary update, because we have a number of candidates.
Yes, so we have 5 candidates running for 2 seats on the school board. Anytime you have more than double the amount of candidates that are for open seats, you're required to hold a primary election. The primary election will be held on February 21st. You can see the 5 candidates that are listed, and that is the ballot order as well. We did a ballot draw on Thursday of last week, I think. Jamie, you were...
I was there.
You were seeing that. It is quite a suspenseful and well-attended event. It takes about 5 minutes. But you can see how names will be placed on the ballots, and that will be for the 21st of February. The regular election, essentially what will happen is the top 4 vote getters out of 5 will then move on to the general election on April 4th. So, Tim Miner, who's up talking with Jamie right now, is kind of all things election. So if you have questions specifically related to the school board races, he is going to be the person that can best answer those questions for you. So that's all I have.
Any questions about the primary?
All right, hearing none, then we move on to citizens' request to speak. And as is our policy, we have requests tonight that are both for agenda items and non-action items. And so we have one person speaking on non-action, and then we'll take up those that have signed up to speak about a specific agenda item. We'll take those comments at that time. I guess I will just read now the public input or public comment policy we have, and then I won't have to reread it when we get to those action items. But the public comment is for input only. It is not a question and answer session or a time for debate or a dialogue session with the school board. Members of the school board will not respond directly to public comments that are made at this meeting. No specific action will be taken at this meeting in response to comments that are made or issues raised during the public comment period for non-agenda items. But for agenda items, obviously, there's the potential for action to be made. The other option is for those that are addressing non-agenda items, that action may be taken up at a future board meeting. And also remind folks that with any speaker, a district representative may follow up if there are specific questions that need to be responded to for individual circumstances. We're going to recognize one speaker at a time. Only those speakers who are recognized are permitted to speak. Based on the number that we have here tonight, we're likely to just allow the full 3 minutes. That is our policy. But if there are individuals who interfere with or interrupt speakers, then they may be directed to leave. And of course, personal attacks on any individual, including any other speaker, are unacceptable, as are obscenities or profanity. Persistence in making such remarks will end the individual's opportunity to address the board and may result in the individual being directed to leave. So that is our policy. And for this non-agenda or non-action item, we have Mark Dolan from McCutcheon Road. Yes.
I've never done this before, but continued interest in the capital projects for general maintenance of facilities, such as...
Sir, so you're addressing the referendum items?
No, I'm just talking general, like, when do we fix the roof? How often do we fix the roof? When do we put in a new air conditioner?
Okay.
Okay. The second one was the educational efficiency versus the term, how are our K-6 doing in their reading competence? Okay, it's just a general question. And the other one was really for Zimmerman, that, you know, Ohio State has a welding engineering program, bachelor, master's, and doctorate of welding engineering. UW-Madison does not have a welding engineering program, and maybe he should lobby the people at the engineering school that we have a welding engineering program for the Wisconsin students from Hudson, Wisconsin. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your comments and your questions. We'll, again, try to have somebody follow up with you. I appreciate that you provided your personal contact information. We can get that to you. All right, we will move now on to action items, and always the first up is the consent agenda. I will entertain a motion to approve unless there's a motion to remove.
Mr. President?
Yes.
I move approval of the consent items and that the Chief Financial and Operations Officer be authorized to pay bills in the amount of $2,111,498.59.
All right. Is there a second? All right. Second by Heather. There's no discussion. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it.
Mr. President?
Yes.
We do have one retirement that I want to recognize.
I saw that. Somebody with 24 years.
Yes, Linda Morning, who's a longtime special ed teacher, EBD teacher at the middle school, 24 years of service, and she has decided to retire at the end of this year. So we will be celebrating her this spring.
Okay, excellent. And when is the deadline for announcing retirements?
It's passed, so December 15th.
Okay, so I remember we had one at the last meeting.
Yes, so I believe we only have 2 retirements this year.
Okay. Well, you can tell we're not in COVID anymore, I guess.
Yes, we had a little bit of a spike during that time period for sure.
Yeah, we did. All right, very good. Well, next up on the action items are procedures for supporting gender nonconforming students, families, and staff. And before we turn it over for board action, under 5B, we have a few speakers, and I'm just going to recognize them in the order that we have. I would ask, is there another board member that has a timer? I've always had a problem with mine being loud enough. Okay.
Carrie's got it.
Carrie or Kate has it. I'll just start the timer when they approach the microphone, please. But first up is Michelle Hendricks. All right. From Ward Avenue, right? Okay, very good.
So I just wanted to say that I do appreciate all the work you guys have done in developing this policy. I know it's not easy. I do not agree with some of the changes. I agree with the overall philosophy of supporting all children, but I do think that parents should be involved at all steps of the conversation. It's one thing if a kid's just requesting information, you know, or is just curious, that's fine, I don't care. That doesn't necessarily mean a parent needs to be notified, but the policy speaks to like the child receiving counseling to be ready to talk to their family, but there's no timeline or details provided. So is it 2 weeks, 2 months, a year? I don't really feel comfortable with a counselor or teacher that I don't know personally talking to my kid about these types of issues without my knowledge. And also, being a parent, we've known our children since birth, and you guys, your interactions with my child may only be for a couple hours a week or a month, and you might not know all of the other challenges that they're facing, and I think it's really not good to exclude the parent from these types of important conversations. So, you know, people talk about being inclusive. You should be including the parent in their child's decisions. That's all I had to say.
All right, thank you very much for your comments. Next up, we have Jayla Beer from Aspen Drive.
Okay. Hi again. Thanks again for having us out. As a parent, I can understand why a lot of parents feel like they want to be there every step of the way. That's totally understandable and respectful. However, as we've gone over, numerous times, not every parent is actually a safe parent to come up to. And when we're saying not safe, we're not even necessarily saying, oh, CPS worthy level of abuse or being kicked out safe. It's also a matter of a parent could decide that they're going to pull their student from activities because they don't deserve to do it until they conform to what they want to believe, what the parent says. This is who you are, this is what you are. There are parents that will refuse to let their child spend time with their friends, with their support system. That's a big concern. On the teacher level, I know that there was some concern about what if we accidentally out a student because, we get so used to calling them by their name. I don't know how the technology side of it works, but I would imagine that the teachers have some sort of a note system that they can keep on various students, where they could just maybe put in parentheses their requested name and maybe just put a hyphen in NOTP, meaning not out to parents. It's something that would pop up for them. It would be right there in their line of sight, so it would be very hard to forget. Heather had brought up at the last meeting, kind of equated, a trip to Hawaii. So going off what she said, you booked the trip to Hawaii because of all the great things that could happen. You wouldn't cancel your trip just because there's a fear that you might get stung by a jellyfish. So in my opinion, you guys respecting the child by what name or pronoun they would like to use is not that big of an ask, and it's something that even a portion of supportive adults doing so can make a drastic difference in these children's lives. It's many, many lives currently and upcoming that will be affected by this referendum and this amendment. And that's something that you guys really need to take into consideration. Like I said, as a parent, I understand. I want to know everything my child is doing. But truly, there are some situations where depending on how I would treat my child based on what they say or how they act versus, in regards to who they are, that it might not have been a safe thing. And if you're going to treat your child like crap because they come to you and say, I feel I'm trans or I feel I'm non-binary, that's just not cool.
All right, thank you for your comments. Next up, we have Aaron Gerlach from Cooley Trail.
Good evening. I am a parent of 3 in the district. I want to thank you for serving the community on this board and providing time for testimony. The state requires parents to fill out a form that grants the school permission to issue a cough drop for a tickle in a child's throat. There are forms from teachers that we fill out asking us if our child has a nickname they prefer to be called. Both of these practices are acceptable. In stark contrast to cough drops and nicknames, gender conformity is a much bigger issue, and it challenges family dynamics, and it needs parent involvement. I listened to your conversation at the last school board meeting, and I have read through your support plan. This policy does not mention anything about the ages of children. 6 versus 17 is a huge difference. Nor does it mention how long counselors would be allowed to develop the skills and readiness to speak to their families. Schools should not be counseling in this manner without parental consent, nor hiding or skirting these issues in any way, which were suggested at the last meeting. Not only does this policy put teachers and staff in a difficult position, but it damages the relationships between schools and parents, where there really should be trust and transparency. If this passes as is, it would undoubtedly set a precedence that leaves parents wondering what else is going to be withheld from me. Before you vote on this 5B issue, please ask yourself, whose children are these? The role of the school district is to teach our children, support the parents in their education, and work together to communicate when issues arise. You want parents to trust you, but this policy shows you clearly do not trust parents. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your comment. Next up, we have Kristen Hansen of North Hudson.
I kept my coat on. It's rather chilly in here. I don't know if you guys feel that frost in the air, but I'm freezing. So anyway, I am a parent. I have 2 children in the district at the elementary level. I'm here also to provide comment on the proposed memo for gender diverse students. I do agree that all students need to feel safe, accepted, and welcome at school, including children who are not gender diverse. Many have spoken before about the use of pronouns and different names as a means to achieve feeling accepted, but that some students fear for their safety if parents know that they are questioning their gender. If the safety of a child at home is a real concern, then other resources and supports need to be activated according to what is required by law. I do have a few questions and concerns regarding this memo. One concern I have is that there is no mention of age in this memo. I don't think the same approach applies across all grades, kindergarten through 12th. The way this situation should be handled for a 2nd grader is likely very much different than that of a 10th grader. So I would like to know how age will be addressed. Next, what are the expectations of our counselors? How long are they expected to keep this confidential before parents are involved? What about referring to external resources and supports? I'm concerned that our counseling staff is not resourced appropriately to support this practice. I also think parents should be informed without delay. These are our children, and if building open and honest bridges of communication is the goal, then delaying the transmission of that communication is not going to benefit that goal. As soon as parents realize how long they've been deceived, trust will be eroded between families and the district. This is definitely a sensitive and deeply personal issue, which is why families deserve to know as soon as possible so they are able to address the issue in a way that works best for them. I would like to thank you all for the thoughtful efforts being put forth to address this issue that impacts us all. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comment.
Thank you. Next up, Beth Weiskopf of Hudson.
Good evening. Thank you for the time to speak. I'm here tonight as a parent who would be devastated if I found out the district was lying and hiding information about my kids from me. As a parent, I send my kids here for an education, not for the district to act like a parent to my kids. What are you teaching our students when you are willing to lie and hide things from parents? That it's okay to lie? As a parent, I teach my kids that lying is wrong, and I would hope all parents would do that. When I've had the conversations with district admin in the past, it has been reiterated time and time again that the district is trying to build relationships and work with parents, not destroy them, which is what lying to them will do. Current parents have to register their kids for school. They have to report absences. They have to okay medication at school, okay class schedules, pay for sports and other school fees. But yet some of the board thinks it's okay to hide things from us, and we don't need to be involved in certain subjects about our kids. That is not building relationships. I'm sure there are situations that are not safe for some kids, and the school should then get other authorities and resources involved, as those situations likely need more attention. All parties should work together to work through it and find the best solutions to handle things. As a parent, I would want to help my children through any situation and get the help needed that we as a family decide is right for us. Hiding things would take that away from parents. The teachers and school would only be hearing from one side, the student, and making a decision to not involve parents and not hearing the parent side. Putting this on teachers is also a heavy burden that distracts from the education they are here to teach our kids. Teachers should be able to just teach the subjects at hand and hand the social situations to the counselors and administration to work on jointly with parents. I was also dumbfounded when listening to the meeting in December to hear a school board member suggest that the district tell kids as young as 14 that they can go to court without their parents to change their name. I don't have any words for that. So the district is now giving out legal advice to minors or any student for that matter. I, for one, will not support any board member who is okay with hiding and lying to parents. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you all for your comments. That concludes the public comment portion for 5B, and now I turn it over to board members.
Last together, I thought, perhaps mistaken, that we were going to reach out to students who might be affected by this memo, teacher, staff, counselors, as well as parents on both sides of the issue to collect their input, just because of how potentially divisive this policy memo may be. Did we wind up spending any time with any of those groups, Nick?
As I responded to you in the email, no, we did not. What we did in this memo is we put in writing what the explanation was surrounding the memo from the last meeting, so that was clarified. So the direction of the memo has not changed. It's just we did add in there just some of those clarifying pieces that, you know, if there's not a request for a change, there's not a requirement to call home. However, any changes for that kid would still need parent permission in order to make those changes. And then, you know, at the bottom, the additional language there was also added that we feel that it is in the best interest of our staff to be open and honest with parents. But these conversations are sensitive and should be best had face to face. And so the short answer is no, we have not changed our direction on this, and no, we have not added additional outside groups to give feedback on this memo.
Right. We got to push it up.
Because I respect the work of our administration, and the legal advice we've been given, I will make a motion to approve the memorandum as it is.
As presented by the administration today?
Yes.
Okay. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and it's open for further discussion. I guess one clarifying question Rob asked about inclusion of others. Did we get reviewed by legal counsel?
We did have it reviewed by our attorney. The edits were reviewed by the attorney.
Mr. President?
Yes.
I wonder if we could add something, though, after listening to some of the speakers, like a friendly amendment or something to add to that memo, because it is a concern about age, the age of a student. I think elementary is far different than middle school or high school. And then also specifically the counselors speaking to the kids might be more of a let's communicate with your parents as opposed to we're in a counseling session.
Yeah, I mean, so again, the conversation with counselors is something that our counselors have, when kids have things that come up in their life, they try to talk to them about talking to their parents. It is not designed to be a counseling session, an ongoing counseling session. It really is to get them to talk to their parents. As far as the age guidelines go, the reason there's no age guidelines in here is because regardless of age, all the way up through 18, it would require parent permission to make any changes. So whether they're 6 years old, 16 years old, 17 years old, it would still require parent permission. So even at the age guidelines, I don't know what we would use those guidelines for, because like I said, our encouragement with our counseling department is to give the kids the skills to be able to have conversations with their parents. It's not counseling as it relates to identity and things like that. And our counselors have done that with kids having talked to their parents about pregnancies, substance abuse. I mean, there a variety of things. This is not our counselors talking to kids about trying to get them to, push them to talk to their parents. It wouldn't be out of their repertoire. Unless, Tara, you have different thoughts on it? Following them.
Okay. And with the one exception, because you mentioned, obviously, if they're 18, they're no longer minors. And I think there was a reference to that in one of the comments, but emancipated minors would also have the ability to control their information in the information system.
That would be a question that I wouldn't be able to answer because I'm not familiar enough to be able to answer that question for you. It's something I could check with our attorney and get back to you on. I don't know what that process. I don't know what that process looks like. If we have paperwork, the way we operate is if parents are listed in Skyward, we share information with parents unless we have paperwork that says they're not allowed to be shared with. Believe it or not, that happens on lots of different issues. A lot of times it comes up when divorce situations where somebody say, I don't want you to share this with my former spouse, and we say, unless you have paperwork that says we can't share it, they're entitled to information. So as far as the emancipated youth piece, in the 8 years that I've been here, I've never had that question come up. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It's just not real common. I know, Tara, if you have a better background on emancipated, it'd be something we'd probably have to check with legal counsel on. I don't have a good answer for you.
All right. Any other questions or comments regarding the revised memo? Yes.
One question to Kate's comment. I guess I am being naive. Is it not just common sense that at an elementary age, any type of concern with a student that's brought to a counselor would immediately be a call to a parent?
A lot of these things are case-by-case basis. Our counselors talk to kids about a variety of things, and I think, again, our perspective is we don't keep secrets from parents, and we don't lie to parents. And so, if this would to come up in an elementary situation, it would be working with the child to say, how can we have this conversation with your parents? and working with it, and kind of work through it. It's just, some of these situations, they just don't come up. I'm not saying they can't, they don't come up, but our encouragement would be then to have the conversation with parents. And then, people have asked, what if a parent asks point blank, what are we supposed to say? That's why we put in the email, or in the memo, we believe that people need to be honest. However, set up a, and it is, set up a meeting with that parent to have that conversation. Those are tough conversations to have for everybody involved. And we don't lie to parents, and that is our expectation. And that hasn't changed from the memo. So that's the basis of it.
Mr. President?
Yes, Heather.
So two things. I think we shouldn't lie to parents. I also don't think that we should lie to students. So if you've got a student sitting in your counseling office and they say, isn't there any way I can make this happen without telling my parents? There is a way you can legally make it happen. I don't think we should lie to students either. So to address, I hear your concern. We disagree on that one. So I apologize, Nick and Jamie, because they've both heard from me today. I think most of you know that there's this rule around walking quorums with school boards that we aren't actually allowed to have a conversation between meetings. And so if something comes out and we have a response to it or a reaction to it, we can't actually email the whole board to say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. We have to wait until the board meeting to do that. So I did, and I've told Nick and Jamie this, I was disappointed because I thought we left the last board meeting with direction around a revision to this policy that would do two things. One, that would incorporate the language that was incorporated that clarifies that staff members would not be required to notify a parent after a conversation like this. The other thing I expected to see in this next draft was language that somehow addressed our conversation about, isn't there a way that we could give individual teachers the ability to respect and honor a student by choosing to use their preferred name and pronoun at school, as long as they didn't make changes to the record, and knowing that that would be an individual teacher's choice, because not until is it legally changed in the record would staff be expected to then use that student's preferred name and pronoun. And that didn't come through in the revision, and I kind of thought, am I losing my mind? And so I sat and rewatched our meeting, and there was some back and forth, so there wasn't like there was a clear, here's what we want. But I think, and I don't know if you're able to pull up, I did just put on paper kind of what I was hoping to see in the draft that we were all emailed late last week and that was shared with you. So I can't vote to support this as it's written, because I really feel like we need to give students, we need to respect students, so that if there's an individual teacher they have a relationship with and that teacher wants to use that student's chosen name and pronoun, that they're able to do that as long as they let the student know, hey, I can't change your record. And hey, really, if you want this to go as you want, we really need to get your parents involved, because that's the only way that you're going to get your record changed, so that all staff will call you by the name and pronoun you've chosen. And also that it's the only way to kind of prevent that accidental disclosure that a kid would be at risk at if they didn't choose to involve their students so they could make the change. So this is what I sent. No, this is not what I sent. Are you able to pull up, Nick, what I sent you?
I would have to forward it to Tim. I'm not actually connected to that thing.
You aren't in charge?
No.
You aren't the wizard?
No, I am not connected to that. But I believe.
So I'll share them
If
with
you
the rest
have
of the
it,
board.
yeah.
Well, I can't share either though, right? The changes really would be that I would like to see would be in the, it's going to be hard to listen to me read it. Until we have parental consent, individual staff may choose to address the student by their preferred name or pronoun, but we will not change the name provided by families in our student information system. Students will be informed that the district's strong preference is that families be involved in this conversation, as this is the only approach that can lead to updates to the student information system and is the approach that best protects the student from an accidental disclosure of the student's preferred name or pronoun. So that would be the one change I would have liked to have seen some version of that we could have discussed. And then the other thing that then I suggested adding was to reiterate that in that next paragraph, when we engage parents, involve parents, when parents approve that change, that the draft said we will communicate with teachers about that change, and at this point, all staff will be expected to address the student by their preferred name or pronoun. I think that's important to clarify. So that's what I would have liked to have seen, and that's the kind of guidance that I would feel comfortable supporting.
Okay, yes, Kate.
I will say that when we had that meeting, I didn't feel like there was a clearer direction on where all of the board members wanted to go. I know that's what you were thinking, Heather. I didn't get the feeling that the rest of the board was thinking that.
Well, I think there was a mixed, and actually as I watched the video, because there was a motion, it was my motion to include this kind of language, but it wasn't in writing, and there was a second to the motion. And then the motion was tabled because board members said, before I could vote on that, I'd want to actually see it in writing. So I was thinking that we were going to see in writing a proposal that then people could vote for or against, but that would incorporate both those things that we had discussed. But that when the motion was tabled, which in theory then could be acted on at this meeting, but we didn't get a motion that would be we didn't get in writing the thing that would enable us to take action on that motion that was tabled. But I agree, it wasn't like there was 100% consensus one way or the other, yeah.
Mr. President?
Yes, Terry.
I had seconded that motion, which I would not do again tonight. Nothing in this memo states that a teacher can't use a nickname. I think teacher, all kinds of, no, it doesn't. It says they don't have to. It says they're not obliged to use a name other than what's in the student record.
Yes, until we have parental consent, we will continue to use the name provided by families in our student information system.
It's not mandating that. It's not mandating every single teacher does that.
That would, the intent would be that we would utilize the name in our student information system until we have parent permission to do otherwise, is the intent.
So we should now be addressing you as Nicholas, unless
Unless it says Nick.
Well.
No, but I mean, that's.
And actually, we have gotten legal interpretation on this. I mean, shortening somebody's formal name from Nicholas to Nick is not the same thing as changing their identity or changing their name. It's just not. And as this has evolved, if that is a direction that people want to go, it is something that we can incorporate into a new memo or a new board policy that says, that's fine. We'll move that direction for all names no matter what. But we do have a spot in our student information system now, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, where they can put a nickname when they register their child for school.
Yes, there's a nickname spot, and there's also another feature within Skyward that would allow a little more proactive opportunity to streamline that process.
But this is done by the parent when the parent registers the child for school. It's not done by students by themselves.
Long story short, I support the memo as written, and the school's collaborating with parents for the students.
So can we just get clarification? What I think I heard is that the memo as written, staff would be told that if a student comes and requests use, that they be recognized by a different name and pronoun, and the name is not simply a shortened version of their legal name, staff would not be allowed to use that name.
Yeah, our expectation is that staff would use the name in Skyward until we have parent permission to do otherwise. That is the intent of the memo. I thought we were pretty clear on that, but maybe not. But that's what is intended by until we have parent consent. We will continue to use the name provided by our families in our student information system.
Any other comments, questions? And I would just add that I did have opportunity to talk to legal counsel today after I got the revised memo from Nick and saw the email that our legal counsel, Shana Lewis, did review the memo. I asked for further elaboration, and obviously she said our district can choose to do what a few districts in the state have done, to go beyond this and give the power to children as to indicate what their gender and pronoun preference will be in school. But if we do that, then we're on weaker legal footing, and so she would say that we would be opening ourselves up for potential lawsuit. And it is a fine line, and sometimes some people would say it's almost a no-win situation when you have one where the student doesn't feel comfortable talking about this with parents. But in the end, legal counsel's advice was to keep the wording that we have in the direction which, as we indicated in the last meeting, which was to table this, it doesn't change what the procedure is. This is just a memorandum clarifying and putting in writing what is the current practice. So
Just two quick things, and I mentioned this at the last meeting, but it does change past practice. It does change practice that had been happening in our district until this fall when we started having conversation. And so just to recognize that. I guess the final thing I would say is, and I said this at our last meeting, I have to believe everyone in this room would like to see a situation where a student says, yep, let's get my parent involved. The district engages the parent, and the parent is the child's biggest cheerleader as they are navigating this kind of a challenge. I think my guess is that most parents who have spoken this evening are parents who have great relationships with their kids and likely have the kids who would maybe through tears say, yeah, let's call my parents, or maybe they would have spoken to their parents first. This isn't about those kids. And I just want us all to have a little bit of empathy, or to think about the kid who doesn't have a parent, like those of you who are here tonight advocating for your kids, a kid who has a parent who maybe though they don't worry that their parent is going to physically harm them, is really worried about what their life is going to be like if their parent ever finds out that this is who they are. These are the rare kids that we're talking about, and giving them just a little bit of flexibility in our school environment to build a relationship with a supportive adult to help make life a little bit more tolerable during a really hard time. That's the kid who is first in my mind when I'm thinking about where we should go with policy. And yes, hopefully all those kids can get to a great conversation with their parent. This policy isn't about all those kids.
Mr. President?
Yes, Rob.
And so this memorandum or policy isn't about procurement. It's not about transportation. This is something that is highly sensitive to our families. You know, regardless of where your position is, this is something that is important to a certain subset of our student population. It affects our teacher staff, our counselors. And as such, I'm not going to be able to support this tonight without community engagement.
Okay. All right. Is there any other comments or questions? All right. There's a motion before the board to adopt the memorandum outlining the procedure for support for gender diverse students. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay.
Nay.
It's called the chair that the ayes have it, and the motion passes. All right, next up we have consideration and action upon initial resolution authorizing the issuance of general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $29 million. Nick, you want to introduce this?
There are three different resolutions in front of the board, I'm gonna talk about all three together and then separately, if that makes any sense. So the first two resolutions, one is for the issuing of $29 million worth of general obligation bonds. You're not actually issuing bonds, you're not borrowing the money. All you're doing is saying, yes, we would like to take to the voters the option, give them the option to decide if they want to do that. The other one, item number D on there, is the consideration and action to exceed the revenue limit. And then option E is it's a combined with the two of them. What that resolution is it says, yes, we want to do these two items, and you need to hold an election on April 4th. And so they all kind of work together, and so that's why they look the way they do. The first item, just take item C. The motion that would be needed would just be the first paragraph, or if somebody wanted to make a motion, they could say approve the initial resolution authorizing the issuance of general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $29 million as defined by the resolution in print. So you don't have to read necessarily all of the different words on it, but you can read the title as defined, and that can be your resolution. They will require a roll call vote on each of these individual items. The $29 million is, it comes out to be actually a total of $44 million worth of projects, of which $29 million of the projects would be financed using general obligation bonds. Again, you're not approving the projects, you're not approving the bond sales, you are merely saying, we have intent to ask the voters if they would be okay with this.
All right, and then I guess I wanted to interject here because the next three agenda items, 5C, 5D, and 5E, as you pointed out, are interrelated, but procedurally, we have to pass each of the resolutions separately, and then the third one is the two combined, correct?
Yeah, so I mean, if there's going to be public comment, I would put public comment on C, D, and E all at the front end, because you're going to kind of be talking about all of them.
Yeah, because we're talking about operating and capital. All right, so with that, then I'm going to recognize our speakers, and again, because of the number, we're going to allow up to the full 3 minutes. And first up is Kristen Kessler of Thelen Farm Trail, or Thien Farm Trail.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm the mom of 4, 2 current and 2 future Holton students. One is Lizzie, class of 2040. And we have such a gem in Holton, and I'm so thankful for the school and the teachers. I've been at the meetings, listened to the feedback, looked at the plans, reviewed the data, and the plans have evolved based on the community feedback, and I do appreciate that you guys have listened to all of that. I was hopeful at the last meeting to hear that it's not your goal to close the 2 schools, but I also hear that we have insufficient operating funds, school maintenance needs, uncertain enrollment projections, and excess space and land for the current projections. And this is in the context of financial and enrollment uncertainty, right? So we need to be financially and fiscally responsible and not move too quickly to spend too much money or to close schools and be nearsighted, short-sighted. So we're left with some tough decisions. We've been guided to this point through the meetings, and together, as the board and the community, we need a path forward, and this means to pass a referendum that will pass based on community support. There was a time when the options really affected every family in this district by redistributing grades between the schools, and I think would have had a lot of community interest at that point, but it ended up being boiled back down to essentially the threat of closing Willow and Holton. So I'm thankful that we've tabled the discussion of closing the 2 schools, but you reiterated at the last meeting that you can't pass it without our support. So we're left with an operating referendum, which we need, and the priority maintenance that does not include maintenance at Willow and Holton. So we are concerned that maintenance and expansion of North Hudson and EP Rock may continue to lead us to the ultimate end of closing the other 2 schools. So how do we gather community support for the second referendum, acknowledging that those most involved at these meetings and most interested have been the families of Holton and Willow River? How can you reassure us that by supporting the referendum, this continues to promote our goal of ensuring that Holton and Willow continue to thrive for the class of 2040 and beyond?
All right, thank you for your comments. Next up, Megan Rosowski of Willow River Drive.
Hi. Thank you so much for listening to the many community members who raised their opposition to closing Holton and Willow River. I left the November meeting so excited that the board had made the decision to keep Holton and Willow River open as we watch to see what happens with enrollment. After that meeting, I shared a letter with you all that included the names of more than 40 families and supporters of Holton Elementary that stated, we would wholeheartedly support and advocate to pass the operating referendum and a capital referendum, even if it excluded capital investment in Willow River and Holton. When I wrote that we would advocate for the capital referendum, we didn't mean any capital referendum, and that's on me. I apologize. We had assumed that the capital referendum would focus on priority 1 and 2 investments in all of our other elementary schools and the middle school that needed it. So I was glad to see priority 1 and 2 investments are being looked at for the middle school and for EP Rock. I was shocked to see that the capital referendum plan includes additional classroom space, a new gym, and a renovated locker room at North Hudson. Overall, the proposed $18 million investment in North Hudson exceeds the priority 1 and 2 capital investments by about $9 million. It even exceeds Wold's $10 million estimate of what it would cost to address all the capital and cosmetic needs of North Hudson. If we would have known this was the capital referendum plan, the Holton community would not have voiced their support for it. The board's talked about the fact that it's going to be difficult to get the referendum passed, that we need to get support from the 70% of district residents who don't have children in our schools. A capital referendum that utilizes taxpayer money for unnecessary classroom and gymnasium additions and cosmetic upgrades is not a judicious use of taxpayer funds. I fear it puts both the capital and operating referendums at risk, as taxpayers may feel the district is not using money wisely. And I feel that adding additional classroom space at North Hudson, which is currently under-enrolled, will be used as a justification for closing Willow River and Holton in the future. The Holton community supports the operating referendum of $8 million. We're going to hit the streets, we're going to talk to the community, we're going to hope to get this passed. We believe in this, we know it's necessary to keep our schools open. We cannot, the Holton community cannot support and advocate for the capital referendum. I cannot go tell people that we need a new gym and more class space at North Hudson, that the community needs to spend money on that. I urge the board to consider a different option for the capital referendum, address the priority 1 and 2 needs at EP Rock, North Hudson, Hudson Prairie in the middle school, and address priority 1 needs at Holton and Willow River. I urge you to vote no on the current capital referendum on the table, or table it and come up with a new option before the January 24th deadline. And I urge the board to vote yes on the $8 million operating referendum. Thank you.
All right, next up, we have Scott Ellingson of 6th Street.
The Hudson Education Association absolutely supports the proposed $8 million operating levy for the operation, maintenance, and staffing costs for all schools, including Willow and Holton Elementary. Our support for this levy, coupled with our support for the new TSS compensation structure that was presented to you in October, will best position Hudson to compete for and retain high-quality educators for all of our schools. Our strong community schools with strong educators will continue to make Hudson a destination for families and businesses. We ask that you amend the $29 million capital levy to include facility and ground improvements for Holton and Willow Elementary. At the middle school November community meeting and at the November school board meeting, you witnessed a great deal of passion and reason for keeping all of our community schools open. We need all of that passion and more to pass both referendum questions. Having one question that helps all schools and another question that ignores Willow and Holton Elementary sends a mixed message that could jeopardize maximum support. Neither school is looking for fancy bells and whistles. Parents, staff, and students are looking for commitment. For months, even years, we have heard about needs for each of the 4 elementary buildings in question. There must be some need at Holton and Willow that could be addressed with this referendum, no matter what their futures may hold. Commitment is a two-way street. Holton and Willow parents, present, past, and future, have offered their commitment to this referendum. We are all grateful for your desire to keep all schools open. The best chance to pass both questions is to cast the widest net possible of support. Your commitment to all 4 schools on both questions would be essential and wise. Our students, parents, staff, and community deserve no less. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for your comment. Next up, we have Mallory Hildebrandt of 6th Street.
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to talk tonight. And thank you for your continued efforts as it pertains to the elementary schools in Hudson. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and the Willow River Parent Group. I want to be transparent with all of you about the efforts that have been made and will continue to be made by the Willow River Parent Group, our Willow River families, and the countless members of the community that have supported us. We, as a collaborative group, are passionate and dedicated to the continued focus of the future of all of our elementary schools. After the November 14th meeting, we made it clear to the board you would have our full support in encouraging the community to vote yes to an operational referendum come April. We understand how important this is to providing the necessary funding to our schools. After the November 14th meeting, it appeared the board was leaning towards focusing on the operational referendum, and a capital maintenance referendum would be tabled in order to allow time to see how enrollment numbers shake out. It seems this is not the case, and the board is considering a capital maintenance referendum as well. In looking through the recent proposed referendum, it is clear there are no long-term investments being made to either Willow or Holton schools, the two schools we have been passionately fighting to stay open. We want the board to know that we will not support a capital maintenance referendum that does not consider the long-term future for these two schools. Both Willow and Holton communities have expressed over and over again that we are asking for necessary investments that allow for future growth. We are not asking for over-the-top renovations to either of our schools, but to push a capital maintenance referendum that has no consideration for either Willow or Holton simply sends the message to the community that we are just delaying this conversation. You have seen the outpour of support for these schools, and whether it is now, 5, 10 years down the line, that support is not going to change. The community wants and is demanding these schools remain a pivotal part of the community of Hudson. I have heard the board say multiple times that taxpayers do not want money poured into buildings that will not be here long term. Our ask of all of you moving forward is to start recognizing these buildings are here to stay, and financial investments outside of the scope of required regular maintenance that is already managed is part of our future. I also want to make it very clear that we are in support of all of the elementary schools, and our focus is not solely on Willow and Holton. We know that the elementary schools, the other elementary schools, and the middle school also need repairs and maintenance, and we are in support of that. But we need to see a future for Willow and Holton. We understand you legally have until the 24th of January to vote on a capital maintenance referendum. If you decide to move forward with both a capital and operational referendum, please be sure it shows a future commitment in all elementary schools. We want and understand how necessary it is for these referendums to pass, and we strongly believe that cannot happen without the support of both Willow and Holton communities. Please do not put us in a position to oppose either referendums. Thank you again for all of your time.
Thank you for your comment. Margaret Kaiser, Orange Street.
Good evening. My name is Maggie Kaiser. I have two kiddos at Willow River, one in 4K and one in second grade. As I've expressed to all of you by email as well, I'm a guardian ad litem in our community, and I represent the best interests of many Hudson students in the circuit court for St. Croix County. I will tell you that these smaller elementary schools are priceless to these children. And I've gone into it in more detail, but having more staff available to these children is extremely important because not all children are as fortunate as the children of the parents in this auditorium tonight. So thank you for listening to us throughout this whole process. We can tell that you've been hearing what we've been saying and are responding to it. Willow River Elementary Parent Group, and I continue to support the operational resolution, and we know that that is necessary to move forward. But like the other speakers tonight have said, we were incredibly disheartened when we saw the proposed budget for the $29 million capital resolution. It shocked us. We expected that any capital improvements would address the priorities 1 and 2 of the schools, not things that are not necessary at this time. And frankly, it sends not a great message to our community if you want to show support for keeping all of the elementary schools open. What it says is we are going to continue to let some elementary schools fall into disrepair while we make progress towards a mega school. I just, that's the writing on the wall. That's what I see when I look at that $29 million capital referendum. I am asking you to come up with a budget that addresses needs and not wants. That is what our community is asking for. We need all of the schools to be supported by this capital referendum. And it's something I would gladly stand behind, and I would go knock on doors and ask your voters, your constituents to vote for. I urge you to vote no to the current capital referendum and go back to the drawing board and look at what all of our schools need, not a want. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, that concludes those who have registered to comment on agenda items 5C through E. Dr. Aulette's given the introduction. Is there any other comments that you want to make, Nick?
Yeah, just a couple clarifying points. First of all, it's not additional classroom space at North Hudson to add additional classrooms. We put it in as a placeholder that as we look for spaces in that building to offer ancillary services in our student services department, it may make sense that spaces inside the building get remodeled or taken over for those types of services. And then if that's the case, then we would just be adding back the same amount of classrooms we currently have, but it's adding the level of flexibility. We had to account for the dollars, the way we account for the dollars in the budget is I think it was like a 3,000 square foot allowance if we don't need it, and it turns out to not need that. So it's not an effort to add additional classrooms to North Hudson from a standpoint of adding capacity to that building. That's not the intent, and that's not what we're looking to do. The other piece, as far as addressing the additional, or the gym at North Hudson, it is about needs and not just wants, because currently, if we were going to make improvements at Holton, we would come to the board and ask for the same thing at Holton as well, because it allows us to change the way we deliver instruction during the day, because currently, right now, when we serve lunch dictates when we teach reading. And so it is more about a need than a want. I will tell you, all of these budgets are not, you're not going to walk into spaces that look like this room or look like when you walk out into the commons area at the high school. These budgets are not built around like new buildings. These are built around refreshment, the buildings. They are not going to function much different than they are now. So if we were to talk about wants, we would have them function a lot differently, and the price tag would be quite a bit different as we work through this. Also, you can see in these budgets that were sent from Bray, they have been reduced as far as contingencies reduced and things along those lines to have them fit that $29 million that I think Heather made the motion at the last meeting, as opposed to, so about $2.5–3 million, I think, was shaved off of contingencies. That if things come in higher, we would just either A, have to cut things back, or B, kind of have to underwrite those risks with additional district funds. Go ahead, Heather.
Nick, I recall, so I'm hoping you can speak to gymnastics.
Yep.
Hearing the feedback makes me realize how much happened at the work session, how much information we went through, and how many ahas there were. But I think connected with North Hudson Gym, really important is Title 19 and gym space.
Yep. The Title IX gym space situation as it relates to our gymnastics program, we need to add space for our gymnastics program. The most cost-effective place, it looks like, right now to add that space is North Hudson. And because it's we can do some different things with remodeling the existing multi-purpose space and adding an elementary gym, which is much cheaper than starting from scratch, building a gymnastics facility at another location. And so that's why part of that price tag at North Hudson has grown, is because we are also addressing the gymnastics needs as well. And then as far as maintenance and things along those lines at Willow and at Holton, as we talked about at the board meeting in December, we're not going to allow those buildings to fall into disrepair. We would still be maintaining those buildings, but as the board talked about, giving 3 more years and restudying the demographic numbers, and then making a decision at that time for those buildings, which could then, at that time, need an additional referendum to finish out those 2 buildings. So it is not because we're not doing those, the recommendation isn't to try to close them. It's just, we would not stick huge amounts of money into those buildings unless they're life or safety items. Unless they're needed, because there could be that potential. If a boiler goes down, we're going to replace it. We're going to fix it. If, air conditioning goes out, we're going to fix those things. So it's not we're going to let things just go into disrepair. It's just basically delaying the decision on those 2 elementaries, but moving forward with the other 2 elementaries and the middle school right now. So that is kind of the background on some of those budgets and kind of where we're at. Any other questions I can answer for board members as it relates to the resolutions or where we're at?
Nick, I just think one more thing to call out, because I know there was reference to the level 1 and level 2 repairs that were in the earlier report. And at the request of the district, and I always mix up who we're working with now. Bray went back and actually reassessed, taking into account improvements that have been made due to hail damage repair that was covered by insurance, et cetera, repriced some things or re-estimated. And the level 1, level 2, as we talked as a board, wasn't actually making sense. Like level 1 didn't always feel like what level 1 was defined. And so really the proposal that came kind of went away from that level 1, level 2 approach. And we walked through building by building, and I believe that report from our December work session is online now, so you can see it. Really a fresh take at, okay, looking at each of these buildings, what is it that we're proposing get done? And I guess I would echo, this is not fancy new. We're not tearing down and building new. We are making improvements that are going to make these buildings look good.
They'll look refreshed, and
ridiculous.
They'll probably be set for quite some time. We won't be touching these buildings for a while, but there's not some covert agenda to make mega elementaries or anything like that. It is because we don't, if our enrollment continues to do what it's doing, we don't need a whole lot of additional classroom space. But like, for example, at EP Rock, it's adding a secured entrance onto EP Rock. It's a couple thousand square feet. You have to account for it in the budget. It just happens, that different things, we have to account for those square footage as we move forward. But again, tonight is not the board making the final end-all decision. This is what it's going to look like, or this is exactly what classroom's going to get done, or whatever. It is giving the voters the opportunity to weigh in on this is really what you guys are doing tonight. That wasn't me, I don't think. So,
Mr. President.
Yes, Rob.
And so I appreciate the conversation, and certainly the conversation around priority 1, priority 2. The priority 1s originally were items that were failing or near failure, items that needed to be replaced either now or in the next couple of years. And with this particular budget, getting away from those critical to replace items has caused this budget to increase dramatically. Just looking through the estimates, we're talking now about flooring, cabinetry, casework, paint, new ceiling tile. In all 3 buildings, we're talking about new central water plants, piping, electrical upgrades needed because of the new chilled water systems, totaling almost $2.3 million. And so, some things that were missed, there's no FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And so we'll be moving in certainly desks that are good, but certainly some might need to be replaced. Smart boards, there's nothing as window coverings, there's nothing in here for that. There's no commissioning. And as a board, we received an email from a gentleman who lives in the district and had worked on the high school. And we see the importance that commissioning work brought and the condition it would be had we not commissioned. There's no owner's representation, which we know we're going to need. We talk about priority one items. There's no building envelope testing in this budget. We're focusing on the operational referendum at the same time we're talking about the capital improvements. Yet at Rock, we're replacing like for like 25 unit ventilators, which all those of you who have been to a hotel, you see the little window or a wall-mounted window shakers, if you will. A unit ventilator is really no different than that, except much larger. And so the quality of our classroom and the indoor air quality, noise, other issues that could be addressed, and not to mention maintenance. To maintain 25 unit ventilators over time versus moving to a more central system flies in the face of what we're trying to accomplish from an operational standpoint, in my opinion. I would agree that we haven't had a whole lot of community engagement with this. We haven't surveyed. We've heard from some of the folks tonight that just got a look at the Bray budget from, I believe it was the 20th. If we're looking to go to referendum, and I would agree the $8 million is necessary. I would agree there's a need to go to capital referendum, but we haven't done the necessary work with the public. A year ago, I think maybe even tonight, last January of 21, the school board had an opportunity to go to referendum to pass a resolution, and with the wisdom of the board at that time, the board then said, we haven't done our due diligence, we haven't had enough community engagement, and we're going to wait. And I think we're in that exact same position tonight. Maybe it's even more serious, especially given some of the feedback we've gotten from our public. Thanks.
All right. Any other board members, comments? Kate?
I guess I would echo a lot of what Rob is saying, and I've heard people in the community a lot saying needs versus wants. The operating ask, I think, is appropriate. I do think the capital, Representative Zimmerman said we need to be a more tax-friendly area, and increasing people's taxes is concerning to me. And so I want people to understand why I would say let's look at something else when I vote no on the capital referendum. I just think that it's disingenuous to say that it's maintenance when we are looking at a lot of other things, in my opinion, that are wants versus needs.
Mr. President?
Yes. Holly.
Thanks, Kate and Rob. I guess I come at this a little bit differently. We made a commitment that we were going to wait. We all know, as far as Willow River and Holton go, that is not on the table. We've made that commitment for the next 3 years. Like President Johnson said, if it comes down to programming and teachers, we're choosing programming and teachers over buildings. We hope it doesn't come to that. And we have a lot of positive momentum, I think, with the new build going on in Hudson, and let's hope that keeps going. We know that that's our underlying issue. My take on it is we have some stuff we need to do. If you're going to do, there's no fire suppression system, there's fire alarms. If we're going to upgrade and we're going to put a fire suppression system, there are things we need to do. We're not going to put the old tiles back up. We're going to do the best that we can. This is not luxuries. These are necessary upgrades. When we come and look at Holton and Willow River, we want them to be safe. We want them to be adequate spaces. However, I cannot support bonding millions of dollars for Holton and Willow River at this time without knowing that we're going to have them in hand. So if we bond over 20 years, I want to know we're going to have that building for 20 years. It's not that things aren't going to get done at Holton and Willow River. They will. We're going to hopefully be able to have money from the operational referendum that we can do some things. I thought kind of as we were going forward, the thing that Holton and Willow River get is not being closed. What we heard was, we like our schools the way they are. We don't want them to change. It's not the building, it's the teachers. We do know that we have maintenance we need to do, right? It's not that we're not going to do it, it's just we're not doing it today, okay? So I think it's prudent. We'll spend money on the schools that we know we're going to keep. We'll look at it again. You may have different people up here. They'll have to look at it in 3 years and decide, what do we want to do with Holton and Willow River? And hopefully, we're bursting at the seams. And we're going to revamp them, and we're going to have them for the next 30 years. But we don't know that today. So the best financial decision we can make for our district is to move forward with the things that we know we're going to have with a maintenance plan that is financially responsible and still keep Willow River and Holton open for now.
Mr. President?
Yeah, Bob.
I fully agree with Molly. We made a commitment for 3 years. It doesn't mean that 3 years from now we're going to have a vote on closing the schools or not. A lot can happen. Population of our students may increase or even stay where it is potentially. And you know, we have space for 3,000 students right now, and we have 2,100 students. If you believe that we're growing, you should be heartened by the fact that we're saying we're not going to discuss it for 3 years. Even if we discuss it from 3 years, funding might be changed, as Representative Zimmerman said. We might be thinking 3 years from now, oh, why did we even have that decision? Even with the amount of students we have now, potentially, if we can keep the doors open and keep the buildings running and keep paying our teachers and keep the class sizes the way they are, that's the program, that's the educational program that our parents expect. But we can't make 30 to 40 year investments in buildings that might not be here. We, again, like President Johnson said, about not letting teachers go and increasing class sizes to keep half-empty buildings open. It's just inefficient. It doesn't work. We can't go down that road. Other districts we've seen, what happens is programs get cut. Teacher pay is affected. We lose quality teachers. You have to be responsible, and it's financially irresponsible to put large dollars into buildings that may be closed.
Mr. President?
Yes, Rob.
And so respectfully, Molly, Bob, I appreciate your perspective. The challenge that we have, and we'll be looking at this, I believe it's DI budget model projections in a moment. We as a school district, other than perhaps emergency maintenance in all of our buildings, we won't have the money to provide significant updates, necessary priority one updates to our schools. Nobody's asking for any kind of critical, classroom improvements or necessarily spend millions of dollars unless it's absolutely critical to the ongoing, if you will, survivability of our schools. And there's no reason why a Willow and a Holton shouldn't have the privilege of participating in this referendum if we're going to address those critical items that those buildings need. Again, nobody's asking for what Rock's getting or necessarily what North Hudson is getting as part of this, but to at least pay for those necessary improvements to be done now. Because again, when we get to D, the budget model projections will quickly see that even without calculating those improvements later, we simply won't have that money.
Okay. I don't want to miss anybody else that has comments, but
Mr. President, I'm wondering, and Nick, not to put you on the spot, but and I realize we kind of moved away from that priority 1, priority 2, but if we're saying we are going to make the improvements, the investments that Houlton and Willow need that are safety and regulatory for the next 3 years.
Yes.
Do we have numbers? So not the old priority 1, priority 2, but do we have a sense for what that number is, the expected dollars that would be needed to keep Houlton and Willow at a safe, regulatorily abidant, is that but you know what I mean, to keep them there?
Right now, those buildings are working, and we would continue as things come up to address it. So we do have fund balance that if you had a really big ticket item that came up, and we had to address it that way. But a lot of the items on these maintenance lists are being proactive. Proactively replacing the boiler at EP Rock, and instead of waiting until the boiler goes out, and you can't, it's middle of January. So a lot of those are proactive items to make sure those things are done. At Willow and Houlton, we would, find ways to keep those buildings running and to keep those things up. We would still be doing all those things. We're not going to not, do those things. It's just we're not going to be going in and adding, some of these other systems in there, fire suppression systems, things like that. Do we currently have the standard, fire detection system in those buildings? Yes, we do. However, the fire code has changed multiple times. And so as you start to renovate and do things like that, that would be the time that you would bring them up to the newest code and things along those lines. So I don't have an exact number of what would have to happen today, but we would still, we still do budget about $1.5 million a year for capital projects that if all of the other buildings have kind of been taken care of through referendums, whether it be the high school we're in now, the middle school, or, the two newest elementaries are in pretty good shape, and then these two elementaries, then there is money that is budgeted to handle maintenance items that come up. But I don't have a great number for you. The boiler could last 5 more years, or it could go out in 6 months. And that would be a big change in what that number would be.
Mr. President?
yes, Carrie.
So our current budget is about $1.5 million per year. Should a $8 million operational levy pass, that number could be larger for the next 3 years?
Yes, that number could definitely be larger. We wouldn't need the entire $8 million in year one, so you could set aside some money for those buildings to do some additional work out of that operational levy in the first couple of years. Yes, you could do that.
Thank you.
Right. And Nick, also one of the things that has been discussed at board meetings and was included in your presentation on November 1st was, the cost. And if you look at the comment that was made earlier by somebody, I think up there on the board, maybe the public comment, that this budget has increased. No, the budget has not increased. What was recommended by the facility task force was spending in the neighborhood, I believe, of $100 million on all 6 buildings. And that was to get all these wants of 21st century learning. All of that has been taken out, correct?
Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of additional classroom spaces added to these buildings originally because we were going to remove some classrooms to create some more flexible learning spaces and things like that. Those things have been taken out. It's not the most bare bone budget ever. I mean, I'd be lying to you to say that, there's not a single want in there, but it's also by no means the original look at getting all the buildings to the same educational adequacy as Rivercrest or the high school. So, yeah, those things have been stripped out. Originally, it was close to a $100 million referendum. Now we're talking about a $29 million referendum.
All right, and also the cost for doing both the operational at $8 million and a $29 million capital referendum, what would be the estimated tax impact?
Somewhere between 25 and 30 cents per 100,000. So for every $100,000 of value of someone's home, it would cost them an additional $25 to $30 a year. So anywhere for a $500,000 house, as I think Representative Zimmerman talked about, it'd be anywhere from $125 to $150 increase on their taxes. And that would be at the highest level. Because we're going to base it off of, year one. And as there's additional construction and different things that goes on in the district, that cost gets spread out over a larger group. Just to give you an idea, the high school, when we went for referendum on this project in 2016, we said it was going to be 90 cents per 100 or per 1,000. And currently we are levying somewhere in the neighborhood of an additional like 48 or 50 cents. So we are well under what we were telling people we were going to do. And a lot of that has to do with, we've had a lot of price appreciation, but we've also had a lot of new development that's come online. And so that helps defer some of that cost as you spread it over a larger group. So.
All right. Mr. President. I just want to read a couple letters emails that we got, but one in particular, which was from the Holton parent group, and a letter that was dated November 29th. So it's roughly 4 weeks after the November 1st meeting and a couple weeks after our November 14th meeting. There's an introductory paragraph that ends and says, "It was clear that you have been listening to us and took our concerns to heart, and that you care about our kids, our schools, and our community," which I think is true of everybody sitting up here. Our understanding after hearing the board's discussion at the meeting was that closing Holton and Willow River is being taken off the table as long as the operating levy referendum passes in April. We appreciate the board being so responsive and shifting the plans to wait and see what happens with enrollment in the next few years. Our understanding is the board is going to put together a new proposal for the April referendum, which will include an operating levy and a capital levy for facility improvements for the middle school and grade schools except Holton and Willow River. We wholeheartedly support this plan. As the board made clear, it is imperative that the operating levy pass in April, and it is important that the levy for facilities passes as well. We are ready to help pass the referendum through advocacy, door knocking, signs, and any other actions that will help get out the vote for our schools. We are excited to shift our energy from stopping the closure of schools to advocating for the referendum to pass. And it goes on to say that they want to hear from the board that we will not close Holton or Willow for at least 3 years from if both referendums pass in April of 2023. I personally would be able to give that assurance. Then there was another email that talked about how the parents got excited that we listened and indicated that we would be willing to watch the enrollment numbers and hold off on a decision on closing Holton and Willow pending getting those new numbers in. And the author indicated that people would be coming to the meetings and watching and listening as to what the board's doing. And I believe that at both of our work sessions in November and December, we had one person attend those work sessions in which we discussed for hours this capital project with our architect. And then that one person, I won't name his name because he's not here, but I just want to indicate what his impressions were after being able to listen to the discussion that virtually none of the people in this audience was heard because they weren't at our meetings. But it says, "We know we need a long-term capital investment in our elementary buildings at some point in the near future. We know we need an operational referendum now. We know from the high school referendum that we have a conservative community that prefers utilizing our current facilities over building new. And I just want to stop there because I point out that in those facility task force considerations back in 2021, a couple of the options, and these were even presented on November 1st, included brand new schools at EP Rock and or North Hudson. This budget tonight and this proposal tonight includes neither brand new school at either facility, which I would agree would be, again, a want, not necessarily a need. Now, resuming this one person who has attended the meetings and his impressions, he says, we know the last survey, and he's referring to the one in December of 21, we know the last survey showed that the community would consider supporting no more than a $40 million referendum. We know that the economy is in a tough spot right now and possibly getting worse. I think that by moving forward with the 3 building remodels instead of building a Taj Mahal new building, we can show the community that we are respecting the hardship of the economy while addressing the needs of the 2 elementary buildings that we can confidently say we will be using for the next 20 plus years. I think it is wise to move on this now while we can use the momentum of the Willow and Holton parents that are engaged, as was evidenced by their November 29th letter. I could be wrong, but I believe based off the projected mill rates, an $8 million operational with a $30 million capital would have a mill rate of 36. And as you heard Dr. Ouellette say, it's actually more like, because it's 29 million, it's going to be somewhere between 25 and 30 cents. He goes on to equate it to basically a value basket at Culver's per month. And so I couldn't agree more with the comments of the individual who has followed our meetings, who has read, the proposals and the prior reports from prior architects and prior engineers that have visited all our buildings. And I'm glad that we moved away from the language of priority 1 and priority 2. There really is no priority 1 items. It's not like we have broken windows or failed furnaces and heat HVAC where kids have to wear coats in schools. There are schools in this country where that happens. Thankfully, it's not happening here. Other than this stage is a little cold right now, we could use some coats. But I think that from the standpoint of getting the bang for the buck and doing things, I am a little confused in the indication that this budget leaves out certain things that are needed, like commissioning and building envelope testing. And yet, somehow the budget includes a lot of wants. I think in the end, we have to trust our professionals that we're going to get the things that we need done. And if we set this $29 million level, we will make it work. We did that with the high school. We told the community we weren't going to borrow or spend more than 90 million of bonds, and we ended up going $500,000 under what we told the community that we would spend. And so I think we can do that with these buildings that we know need it. And I would rather see our community get behind our schools, and whether we have to improve them a couple at a time and wait a few years to see what we can do at the other levels, that's what I would support and feel more confident with. So is there other comments or questions?
Mr. President?
Well, I think I saw Heather nodding. Go ahead, Heather.
Thanks, Mr. President. So I know there are a lot of folks watching because I've received emails from a couple of them already this evening. And there are folks here in the room, and I just want to acknowledge it takes a lot to make time to participate in this process. So thank you for being here. It's a lot to get through, and so I really appreciate the feedback from the guy who had the ability to attend our work sessions and be part of that. And I hope those of you who weren't are able to make time, to find time to look through and ask questions, because you weren't there to hear the presentation. I was there, and I was still sometimes confused by it and had to ask questions. So just want to acknowledge that. And I also want to speak directly to the folks, the Holton and Willow parents who spoke tonight and who have voiced their concerns. And I obviously can't speak for the board, but I'll speak for myself. As we talked at our work session, the best scenario we could imagine is that in 3 years, we're going, crap, we need to go to referendum again. Right? We need these neighborhood schools. So there's nobody on this board who is anti-neighborhood schools, who's been lobbying behind closed doors for what's been called mega schools. And we're being pragmatic, and we hope that one of two things happens. Either the data is wrong, because there were some of you who said, this is a blip, this is COVID, give us some time so we can see several years of data before we make any rash decisions. So we hope either that's true, and this is a blip, and what we're seeing in our community with enrollment is temporary, and we're going to see it go back up, and or it wasn't a blip, and we're able to work on some housing solutions in this community that help more families with young children move to this community. So a couple folks referenced, and I think they really felt like they'd been hoodwinked, or like the board was changing plans behind closed doors, and that is really not at all what's happening. We've been spending a lot of time looking at the data, talking with the architects, trying to figure out what we think might be palatable to this community. Should we move ahead with a referendum, and then have the opportunity to really reach out and talk with folks in this community about why we're asking for an operating referendum, why we're asking for a capital referendum focused on these 3 buildings, and what our thoughts are about the remaining buildings, and especially Holton and Willow moving forward. So I know several of you have said there is no way you could support this, you will be actively campaigning against it. The optimist in me is hoping that, having listened tonight, having had a chance to look at the data from our last work session, that you might end up in a different place, because we would sure love everyone to be on the same page with us as we work to generate operating revenue, make investments in the schools that it appears we are certainly going to need, and then maintain Holton and Willow River while we give us a few years to get a sense for the long-term viability of those schools. So that's my hope. And I know I speak for all the board when I say, and we welcome you to reach out to us individually with questions. You can do it collectively, and then you'll hear from Jamie, but feel free to reach out to us individually if either you've got a beef to pick with one of us, something we said, or just feel like there's something that you've got that would help us better understand where you're coming from, because that's the way this stuff gets done. So thank you.
So Rob, you had a question.
Thank you. And so, Jamie, I guess back on a couple of your comments, and as always, very eloquent. With regards to the most recent Bray budget, the wants and needs versus it not including commissioning or the furniture, fixtures and equipment, owners, reps, so on, the budget's very plain in what it does include and what it does not. And so the critical things as it relates to commissioning currently and maybe we'll add them later, they're just currently not captured in the budget that we're going to referendum potentially with. The other comment I have relates back to the November 29 letter. That came from Megan Wrzowski, and she just stood up here and said that basically, as it relates to the capital referendum, if there is nothing in this for Willow and for Holton, at least the priority 1 items, that likely the groups will still support the operating referendum, but not the capital. And so, perhaps the information that was just put out maybe changed their mind or created a sense of urgency around what they thought they were getting versus what they think they're getting now. But again, it gets back to the community engagement and making them aware prior to us being here tonight. And the same reason why a year ago, January, I believe, the board then decided to not move forward with a resolution to go to referendum.
Okay. Is there any other comments or questions regarding that? Now,
I'd be willing to, unless anybody has any other comments, I'd be willing to make a motion to get a vote.
Do we have to read the resolution?
So for the first one, which is the issuance of general obligation bonds, you can make the motion to approve the resolution as written for item C, and just read the title of it. We'll go down C, D, and E.
Okay, hold on.
So that would be reading the portion prior to it, be it resolved.
Okay. Be it resolved by the school board of the school district.
No, you don't have to read it. Read just the title that you're moving to approve.
I'm moving to approve initial resolution authorizing issuance of general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $29 million.
As outlined in this resolution.
As outlined in this resolution.
Okay. There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Was that you, Molly? Okay. It's hard to see when I can't see people's faces, so, all right, we have a motion, a second. Any further discussion regarding this resolution that we have before us? All right. Hearing none, this statutorily, I guess, requires a roll call vote. Correct. So I'll call for the roll on this. Bauman?
Aye.
Brown?
No.
Garza? Logland? Aye. Powers?
Aye.
Whitaker? Johnson? Aye. The ayes have it, and that resolution is adopted. Next is 5D.
5D, and so this motion would again be the title, and as written. So the title doesn't have the $8 million limit, but in the resolution itself, it does have that. So you can make a motion with the resolution to exceed the revenue cap commencing with the 23-24 school year by $8 million, and as presented in this resolution.
Mr. President?
Yes. Curie.
Be it resolved that resolution to exceed revenue cap commencing with the 23-24 school year shall include an amount of $8 million each year in excess of the revenue limits imposed by Section 121.91 of the Wisconsin statutes.
Right.
Second.
We have a motion, second by Bob. It's now up for discussion.
Mr. President?
Yes, Rob.
Nick, would you mind just real quick stepping through the budget model projections? If we could get that on the screen.
Yep.
Yeah, we've had an addition, haven't we, of the 27, 28?
Yep, we added an additional year on the budget model. When I say we, I should say Bonnie and her team put this together. Yeah. But essentially, you have the two different forecasts. They're both based off the baseline assumptions on our enrollment projections. The top assumption is if we were to get 100% of the governor's proposed budget. The bottom one is if we were to get about 75%. It's 50% of the per pupil increases and still 100% of the special ed funding. Now, the thing that you have to remember, we'll run into some pretty large deficits in a hurry. One of the things that will be happening over the course of the next 5 years is as the bubble works its way out through the high school, you will see some budget reductions, staff reductions at the secondary level, like we have already done at the elementary level and the middle school level. So some of that will be offset by budget reductions, but you can look at what some of our base assumptions are in there. But without the operating levy, it will get ugly in a very, very quick situation. And these are both pretty optimistic projections from a standpoint of getting at least either A, what the governor is proposing, or B, 75% about what the governor's proposing. So if we get even less than that, these deficits grow larger, quicker. So hopefully that answered your question.
So I'm reading that, yeah, that's a good question, Rob. And the baseline forecast for the proposal where it's only 50%. So that's if the legislature doesn't adopt more than 50% of whatever the governor proposes within 4 years after this current year, we will exceed the 8 million even if it passed, and we'd be back in front of the voters.
I wouldn't say we'd be necessarily back in front of the voters because not built into this, but you would expect is that as, like I said, our enrollment goes down at the high school, we'll start to make some reductions, so that'll help offset some of that. It's not, you just got to remember, in order to generate millions of dollars worth of budget reductions, it takes a lot of staff reductions, and either that or program reductions. So it won't be perfectly right at that 3-year mark. It could be down the road. And then the way the $8 million operating is set up is that we could potentially bank a little bit of that, maybe not the whole balance, but a little bit of that in the first couple of years, so that we can use that to supplement in years 4, 5, and 6. So you're at least 6 years down the road before you have to go back. But if we have enrollment changes and the good things happen, and we start to see increased student enrollment, these deficits would start to subside a little bit. Because as you look at our enrollment projection numbers, you can see that it's basically us dropping another 240 kids over the next, 250 kids over the next 6 years.
So may I ask
that's 4K through 12.
4K through 12.
Yeah.
Yep.
Ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
And so as it relates to the budget, even with the $8 million if we're fortunate enough to have our community support, likely even if we stash some of the $8 million away, like you said, we couldn't all of it, but some of it, likely we're not going to have much, if any, additional money to put into capital improvements later. I mean, furthermore, if we're going to start cutting because of this, like most districts, they tend to start cutting their maintenance budgets. And so to save programming, because you need programming more so than you do maintenance.
Yeah. So there will be funds. I mean, we're going to be making natural attrition cuts as class sizes go down, as enrollment goes down. So it wouldn't be that we're making the cuts just purely because we're having a budget issue. We'd be making them because it's the right thing to do. Even if these numbers all showed 0 and we had declining enrollment at the high school like we've had at the elementaries, we would reduce staff because we wouldn't keep staff on board that we don't need. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of it depends on what the legislature does. I mean, that's kind of the $1 million question. And I know Representative Zimmerman is really, we've talked lots of times, he's going to try to advocate as hard as he can for our funding and working through that. So, but I would say that it would not be out of the question, I think, that you would have a couple $1 million extra a year to spend on some capital improvements, or you could sock away for potential future capital improvements if you levied the full $8 million.
And I asked that question at our work session, and because we had the $15 million and we were looking at the $29 million and that potential of adding to that 15. And your comment, as I recall, was, well, no, because we're going to need to sock that away so that we don't have to go back to the voters as quickly.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you guys can decide what you want to put the money away for. I mean, it can be half and half. So let's say you need 2.6 to make ends meet, and you have an extra 5.4. You can say we're going to take 1.5 and put it towards capital projects, and we're going to take the other 3.9 and sock it away for down the road operating expenses. It's whatever future boards want to decide how they want to utilize that money. The operating levy has the least amount of strings attached to it. It can be used either for ongoing expenses or capital improvements. It just capital, the resolution was just previously passed. That capital general obligation bonds cannot be used for general operating budget. So
like programming, right?
Yep, correct.
All right. Any other questions or comments regarding that? I guess for reference, too, and Dave, maybe you can help because you're one of the historians, so to speak, from 1999 or 2000, when we last asked for a revenue cap increase, if you will, or exceed the revenue. I believe it was only by either 1.9 or 2.1 million. Wasn't it right around 2 million? Do you know?
I believe so. I honestly don't know. When you, and I appreciate you recognizing me as a historian when really you're just calling me old.
Yeah. Well, you got, close to 30 years? Yeah. But with that revenue cap increase, which the last one was in 99 or 2000, that, we ended up not using it for like 15 years, and what we under-levied would have paid for this high school renovation, the middle school addition, and a great share of the capital needs of the elementaries. But the prior boards took the position of trying to save the taxpayers' money and not levying to the max, if you will. But just because we increase or exceed the revenue cap placed by the legislature doesn't mean that we have to use it all or have to invoke it. But like Nick said, we have flexibility on how we can use it and save it for, future needs.
The last time we did a levy override was in 2001.
Okay.
We did it for a total of $1.76 million.
So it was a recurring, though, 1.76. All right. I knew it was close to 2 million. I didn't realize it was.
It was actually two different questions, one for 1.23 and the other one for 0.53 million.
Okay. And the community supported both then?
Correct.
And that was 2001. All right. Was there any other questions regarding the operating levy that also, in addition to what's already been said? I'm not seeing anybody raise their hand. So this calls for a roll call vote. Bauman?
Aye.
Brown?
Aye.
Garza? Logland? Powers?
Aye.
Whitaker? Johnson? Aye. The ayes have it. And that proposal. Now we have one more in this series, and that is combining the two together. Again,
Well, and again, you're not combining them together. All this is saying is, please put it on a ballot. Both these questions, you've approved now two different questions. Now this is basically saying, we need the approval to put it on a ballot. So.
But we need to read that title.
It would be the title at the top. It's a little bit longer.
Mr. President,
Yes, Heather.
I move to approve the resolution providing for a referendum election on the questions of the approval of an initial resolution authorizing issuance of general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $29 million, and the approval of a resolution to exceed the district's revenue cap commencing with the 2023-2024 school year as detailed in this document. Does that work?
Yep. Yeah. Second? Is there a second to the motion? All right, Carrie seconds the motion. Any further comments?
Mr. President,
Yes, Rob.
and just, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but given the lack of community engagement, like last year, the lack of, I'm not going to say transparency, the information was available, but at the end of the day, the focus on, or lack therein, with, Holton and with Willow, I think we've shown tonight we likely will not have the money later to take care of their critical needs. And I think that just puts a, poor light on what it is we're trying to accomplish. Furthermore, the budgets we have, and I've already been through this, have, air conditioning and electrical upgrades at $2.3 million. Painting, casework, carpentry, carpeting, ceiling, tile, things that aren't, as we've been calling them, priority one, priority two needs. And for that reason, I can't support this.
Just for clarification, that would mean that you would not support also putting the $8 million operating referendum on the ballot as well?
If this is, to be clear, if we had two motions, one motion for the capital and one motion for the operating, I would support the operating.
So this is purely just allowing us to hold an election, essentially. And since they're both items that have been approved by the board, we just need to have the election. I just want to make sure everybody understands. That's why it's not a separate motion. It is, you guys have already approved by majority both those resolutions. Now we're just asking for permission to put it on a ballot. It doesn't mean that you're now endorsing the 29 million. It just means you're allowing questions to go on the ballot.
Yes, and what I'm saying is, I don't think we should go to referendum with the $29 million. I think ultimately it's going to lead to a failure. It's going to be a spend of, really the faith that we've built from the public over the last number of years, and it's going to be harder to go back to referendum later. And for that reason, I'm out.
All right. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Heather.
And I would say, I think we just had one of those examples of when you can hear the same conversation and hear two different things. I don't think I just heard that we've just proven that we're not going to have money to take care of Willow and Holton over the next 3 years. I did not hear that. So I wouldn't want parents sitting in the room to go, wait, what did he just say? I would revisit the data that we just looked at in the next 1 to 3 years. With an $8 million operating referendum, we're actually fine, and we will have money to take care of operating needs, and we could do the math after the meeting if you want, Rob, but the math seems pretty clear to me. I think if we go to referendum, it feels like there is very strong support for the operating referendum, and we're taking advantage of at the same time when we're reaching out to people and talking to them about where the schools are headed, about also asking them to consider supporting these investments that are not priority 1 and 2 investments. They are the investments that are needed in those 3 schools to get them through the next 20 years. And that's our charge as a board, and hopefully the community joins us in that campaign, is to help the community understand what we are asking for, because it is not priority 1 and 2 items, and it's getting those schools positioned for the next 20 years. So,
Mr. President.
Yes, Bob.
I would agree with Heather, and I think we have to look at the potential of going referendum now versus waiting, going for a second referendum. With the cost of that, with the financial cliff that may be happening with funding, if we don't make these necessary improvements in our schools that we know are going to be long-term for sure, it'll be harder to pass a referendum, a larger referendum down the road. I think this is a fair and reasonable approach. I think we have been very transparent with the public from day one, to the point of saying, hey, there's presenting the options, the financial pitfalls. The even discussion of closing schools is not fun, not something that anybody on this table wants to be in a position to talk about. So I do disagree with Rob. I think we had a facilities task force. We have people engaged. I think we've been very honest and upfront. And yes, there have been changes, and the numbers have changed a little bit, going with two different firms in this process. But I'm proud of the work so far, and you know, I'm not going to throw other districts under the bus, but this is much more engaged than what we've heard about some neighboring districts in the past.
Any other comments?
Well,
Can we make these 2 separate motions, or do they have to be?
It's not 2 separate motions, just because you're literally only making a motion to hold an election.
Mm-hmm.
It just happens to be that you guys have already approved these other 2 items. So we asked the bond counsel about it, and he said this is how it needs to be worded, because both these items are going to be on the ballot. So I just want to reiterate, you're not endorsing the 29 million or the 8 million. You're just saying it's okay to. We just need the statutory authority granted by the board to put it on the ballot. So essentially what happens is bond counsel will then create the ballot and send it to the county. So we don't have the ability to split them, from what I've been told.
Correct. And we've, like you said, we've already passed the items C and D, and this is to put it on the ballot, which I believe that's where it belongs. I think the voters should decide this in this community. They've supported schools in the past, and I think they can support it when they see that there's needs. And I think that splitting them would be a mistake, because I think it would make it harder to pass a capital referendum down the road. So is there any other discussion?
Just one last comment on a couple of things Bob said. And again, with all due respect, you know, when we talk about transparency, just as an example, you know, for our public to have to go to our agenda, our December 20 agenda, to find the Bray detail doesn't reek of transparency. You know, to look at the updated Bray detail that's found in our agenda tonight doesn't smell of transparency. So,
is there any other comments?
I just have one question, because I want
Yes.
to be really clear.
Yeah.
So if we vote for this, would there be on the ballot, would there be 2 separate questions?
Yes, there's 2 separate questions on the ballot. This is literally, so you're not combining them in a question. You're just literally saying, please file the paperwork with the county, and it will be 2 separate questions.
Okay.
As it's defined in those resolutions. Absolutely. They're totally, the only thing that's merged together is the fact that we have to have an election. That's the only thing that's merged together.
All right, any other comments?
Call the
Yes.
question.
All right, we'll start with the roll call. Bauman.
Aye.
Brown.
No.
Garza. Logland.
Aye.
Powers.
Aye.
Whitaker.
Aye.
Johnson, aye. The motion passes, and the questions will be on the ballot for April of 2023. Next up on the action agenda is the 23-24 open enrollment space determination, and this one is Andrea, and the next space determination will be Terrace. So,
Yes. So this is the memo as presented at the board work session a couple weeks ago, and our recommendation, as it has been since January 2020, is to have all of our grades open for purposes of open enrollment.
okay. Is there a
Mr.
motion
President?
to approve? Yes.
Move to approve administration's open enrollment recommendation.
Second.
All right, any further discussion? Raise your hand. All right, seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Next up is the 23-24 special education open enrollment space determination.
This is a change from what you've seen in previous years. We've cut that in half from 10 to 5 open spaces. Based on previous year's data, you can see we've only had 1 or 0 students request any spaces.
All right, do I hear a motion to approve the administrative recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, motion by Rob, second by Bob. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Next up is the Hudson Hockey Association contract approval. I assume there's no changes since this was discussed at the work session?
Bonnie?
Yep, there was no changes except for that one clause at the end that 2 different documents could be signed that you said was okay.
Yes. Yeah, you showed that to me when I came in for the ballot draw.
Yep.
Was it's a very common provision, Section 16 of the contract, which talks about counterparts and just allows it to be signed by me separately from somebody from the Hudson Hockey Association. But otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Move to approve, and thank you, Bonnie, for all your work on that contract.
Yeah, it's an excellent negotiation, by the way, and I think it's good for all concerned. All right.
Second.
Second.
Yeah, very well done.
By Bob and Rob. Any further comments or questions of Bonnie regarding the contract? Hearing none, all those in favor of approval of the Hudson Hockey Association contract as proposed, and this is for confirming it's a 10-year contract, correct?
Correct.
All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed say nay. And the ayes have it. Next up, I would entertain a motion to go into closed session and use the wording, please, in the agenda.
Mr. President?
Yes.
The board will entertain a motion to convene in closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.85, Parent 1, Parent F, to consider disciplinary data of a certified staff member, and Wisconsin Statute 19.85, Parent 1, Parent G, to consider legal advice and confer with legal counsel with respect to possible litigation.
All right. Is there a second? All right. Note that Kate seconded Carrie's motion. It requires a roll call vote. Bauman? Aye. Brown?
Aye.
Garza? Aye. Logland?
Aye.
Powers?
Aye.
Whitaker?
Aye.
Johnson? Aye. And just so it's clear, we're going to go into closed session. We will be adjourning from closed session. Thank you all for attending.